The incredible events in the protagonist's narrative begin in a beautiful room, where in addition to elegant flowers, there is also unique dark-colored furniture, where the girl hums various melodies. With red hair and garnet eyes, the lady held a brush covered in oil paints in her hands as she watched with a smile as the different strokes and colors gradually appeared on the canvas. As a sign of completion, the lady applied a final stroke across the white canvas, long and bold with different colors, in order to quickly finish the masterpiece and look at her efforts. Even the palm of the young protagonist was covered in paint, because her fingers did not let go of the brush, but constantly moved it across the canvas, stopping to notice the progress, and then immersing herself in the process again. But when the protagonist of the story solemnly finished painting, the picture put down her brushes and looked at it, she realized that judging by the sloppy, harsh brushstrokes and the poor outline of the person, the picture was not so good. The disappointment did not upset the young lady too much, because on the contrary, she smiled, closing her eyes and realizing that her talent for drawing had after all gone somewhere if she was not impressed by her own works. In a luxurious yet dark aristocratic room, the main character sat in front of a canvas and was upset because she realized that her abilities were no longer as impressive, great, and unusual as before. With slight disappointment, the lady lay down on the dark sofa, while her red hair lay on the furniture, and while she sighing sadly, said to herself that she couldn't be Viola, but it was necessary. The girl closed her eyes because fatigue and indignation were increasingly filling her body, and she herself was thinking that even though she had Viola's body, her skills and voice, she still couldn't be her. And this is all because before she was a completely different person who was reborn in the body of the red-haired Viola, and before the girl was herself, that is a lady with short hair. She also remembers the last moments of her life, because that day she was in an art gallery where she admired every painting that hung on the walls in complete silence and peace, because there were few visitors. The short-haired beauty stood near one of the paintings, watching her in a red blouse with white lines, and realizing that she signed up for a subject like fine art only because she was interested, but she really didn't want to give a report. The girl had a dissatisfied face, with red eyes and dark hair, because she understood that she still did not understand art, even if she was now looking at the works in the famous gallery. But when the lady fleetingly recalled that she had previously worked as a stuntwoman and courier due to poverty, the main character realized that her scholarship, which she really wanted to receive, depended on her report grade. That's why the protagonist went to an exhibition of surrealist paintings to stand next to real masterpieces and understand what she needs to emulate and what she needs to draw in order to receive a scholarship. But at the moment when childhood memories awoke in her head, it was as if everything around her became empty and white, because she remembered how even as a little girl she loved to draw and often brought her drawings to her mother. She recalls that she also attended an art club, the door to which she imagined, when she realized that drawing was not just a way to earn money for her, but a true hobby for the soul. As a child, the heroine remembers taking her drawings for evaluation not only to her mother, but also to a teacher with blonde hair, so that she could admire them. But even in those moments, she had no obvious talent. But now she is in an art gallery and looking at a variety of paintings with a lot of colors, realizing that they don't look so bad, and there is something to look at and think about. The lady with red eyes, a sad face and short hair, looked at the paintings, not understanding whether she painted well, if the scribbles on the walls did not surprise her, or if she was just calming herself down in this way. Thinking that, for her, paintings were more than just paint on paper, she looked at the work of art, which depicted a fair lady seemingly sleeping among geometric shapes. The girl stood right in front of it, realizing that this particular canvas was radiating a strange, alluring energy, although in reality, it looked ordinary if you don't count the mysterious figure in the work itself. The lady's red eyes looked sadly, and it seemed too devastatedly at the mysterious lady among the circles and colors in the painting, because the heroine was trying to understand what or who was depicted in the colors. But fortunately, at the bottom of the work itself, there was a description of it, which the protagonist looked at, wanting to quickly understand what the author wanted to convey with his creation and what the story of the painting was. In the House of Arts, above which there was a blue, clear sky, the heroine read the description and learned that the painting with the mysterious white lady is known to many, has visited many places, and is therefore famous. But when the protagonist carefully read that the canvas can fulfill human desires, her eyes instantly widened in surprise and bewilderment, as if to say, how is this even possible in the real world? The gallery was completely empty, so the girl continued to stand alone in front of the mysterious work, not understanding what was going on, and how paints and paper could make a wish come true. The girl crossed her arms and looked at the painting of the lady, skeptically wondering to herself if this was a joke, and how the organizers could hang this on the wall, inventing such a ridiculous fairy tale for the painting. But deep in the heroine's soul, a hope was still born that the painting could truly fulfill wishes. So frowning, she raised her hand to her lips in order to clear her throat and speak. Her hands were about to clasp together, because in her head the lady was thinking that she had come here not to look angrily at the paintings, but for hope, so she decided to try to make a wish at least for a moment. With her palms together, her eyes closed, and her mouth open with a smile, the heroine muttered that if she was able to grant wishes, she wanted her to start living a life she had never lived before. The lady opened her eyes because she realized that her words were just empty sounds for the pictures, so she shouldn't worry about anyone hearing her, much less rejoice at her wish being fulfilled. This situation made the heroine only smile and put her hand on her belt, also saying that she thought so, that nothing in her life would change, and from this thought, her soul even became calmer and more peaceful. But as soon as the lady thought about not believing in miracles, the mysterious beauty in the painting seemed to smile either from her words or from her herself, showing her modest, barely noticeable smile. But the attentive, short-haired lady quickly noticed the change in the picture because she had been watching it closely the whole time, and then she lowered her hand, staring intently at the silhouette and not understanding whether she was imagining it. Looking again closely at the face of the unknown woman in the painting, the girl realized that she was no longer smiling and that she had nothing to worry about, because it seemed to her that she had only imagined it, that she had seen it because of the light. However, at that moment, a young man in uniform, who guards the premises, suddenly appeared behind the lady and immediately pointed his finger at the girl, ordering her not to touch the paintings, although the heroine had not planned this. The lady in red, bending over, wanted to turn to the guard and say that she hadn't intended to touch anything here, but she never expected what would happen to her after that. The fact is that the protagonist of the story accidentally touched the painting with one hand, and this touch was enough to create a kind of portal through it into which the girl could fall. The heroine remembers that at that moment, she realized that some force had sucked her into the painting, while she herself looked at what was happening in shock, and while a drop of cold sweat slowly trickled down her cheeks. After mysterious events, the main character found herself in a previously unknown room where there was a beautiful window with a dark curtain and dark furniture, clearly for aristocrats, noble people. This is exactly the story that happened to the main character, which is why she immediately woke up in a new body after losing consciousness, opening her red eyes and realizing that her life had truly changed dramatically. Because she woke up in Viola's body, in bed, in a completely unfamiliar place, looking around luxurious furnished apartments, and realizing only that she was in a beautiful palace. Immediately after waking up, the red-haired beauty got out of bed and wanted to grab her head, trying to wake up, and with horror on her face, not understanding what she did wrong and what happened to her. Looking around, the lady realized that she was not just in a beautiful room, but in a mansion filled with many paintings depicting faces, flowers, and other creatures, as if a professional artist lived there. But besides the paintings and luxury, the lady was also interested in her appearance, which is why she got out of bed and walked to the mirror, preparing to see her new face, hair, eyes, and body at any moment. From afar, she had already noticed that her reflection, for some reason, had a red tint, as if something in her appearance was bright, and she had not yet even guessed that this feature was her crimson hair. The surprised heroine glanced at herself in the mirror and realized that she had changed from head to toe, as she now had long, bright hair, no less striking red eyes, and a unique appearance that immediately brought back memories. Then the heroine realized that she had not remembered her past, but the life of a villain named Viola Helen, also imagining her with a fan and expensive earrings, while she herself slyly looked away, revealing a mysterious character. The sudden events made the girl's head spin, which is why she immediately wanted to sit down on the bed to lower her face and think about what had happened and who she was now. But at that moment, as if by luck, her hand touched an unknown mysterious blue book on which was printed the title of a novel that could give her answers to many questions. Viola picked up the unknown edition, looking at the cover, and reading the title of the book, which tells the story of the end of the path of the villainous Red Rose, also realizing that it was some kind of novel. The heroine was surprised, because she realized that she had been reborn into this very novel, because in it, Viola is a sworn villain who was always jealous and followed the white-haired main character, the Duke's beloved. The protagonist imagined Viola as very evil and insidious, with a gloomy face, realizing that she is only a minor character in the novel, especially a negative one considered a villain. Opening the book to random pages, the lady realized that she was unlucky to be reborn as Violetta, because she knew in advance that she died at the end of the story, as a bad character would be expected to do. Once again, imagining the Duke with white hair, the protagonist remembered that Viola had made attempts to seduce the aristocrat, knowing full well that he already had a lover, but she continued to be evil. The next moment, Viola remembered herself lying lifelessly on the floor, realizing that the very same Duke would kill her, thereby ending her miserable, selfless, sad, envious life. Remembering all the most terrible events that she learned about, thanks to the fact that she had previously read the novel, the girl slammed the book shut with her palm, covered it with her hand, telling herself that she didn't like it. But the heroine was even more surprised by the incredible events that happened immediately after she closed the book, which she looked at with surprised eyes, as if it were a real miracle. The thing is, the title of the story gradually disappeared from the blue book, while the lady's fingers continued to hover near the title, as if no one needed it anymore, just like the story about the red rose itself. The lady realized this when she opened the book again and realized that all the letters seemed to have disappeared or evaporated, which is why she continued to turn the pages, not understanding what kind of magic was happening before her eyes. The girl remembered herself in her past life and also imagined herself in a new image with red hair, realizing that her wish had come true after all, if she had been reborn in a new place, with a new body. But Violetta was only worried about one thing, namely why she dressed up exactly like the book's plot, and why everything was so exciting and sudden that she even grabbed her head and almost cried from hopelessness. Unable to bear it being in the bright square castle, the lady screamed because the abrupt changes made her not only worry, but also succumb to a nervous breakdown, as if this was a dead end and the end for her. But she didn't plan to despair, so she clenched her hands into fists, continuing to sit on the large bed and thinking that she wouldn't give up so easily, so she would do everything so that her life would not be miserable and in vain. Raising her fist to her face, lowering her head and smiling, the lady thought that from now on, she would not live the boring and monotonous life of Villa, but was going to change everything radically. The girl remembered that in that world, there was no one to miss her, but when she imagined beautiful statues and works of art in her head, she realized that it was not easy in this world, since art was important here. By presenting paintings with silhouettes of people, the protagonist of the story emphasized to herself that painting is no less important in this world, especially that which has a long, fascinating history. Having been reborn into Viola's body, the heroine remembered the main character, imagining her next to her, and realizing that they often competed with each other in terms of drawing, and Viola often envied her opponent. As if turning to the mysterious white-haired girl, Viola realized that only she saw her as a rival, although in fact the main character of the novel into which she was reborn was a gentle and pleasant person. The red-haired girl remembered the cute appearance of Robin, the main character of the story, imagining her blue eyes and hair, telling herself that she was the one with the incredible talent for drawing. Remembering Violetta's past, the lady realized that the red-haired villain was trying to beat her in drawing, so she constantly copied her style and painting techniques whenever she sat down at the canvas and picked up a brush. Looking at her hand, the girl realized with horror that unlike the real Viola, who is a gifted artist, she can only be a gifted clumsy lady because she can't do anything. Looking sadly at her hand, the girl clenched her fist and realized with shock that she lacked the most important thing to confidently be Viola, namely, the talent for drawing, which made her sad. In the dim room were the beautiful outlines of the bright interior, where the lady was sadly silent due to the devastation. But when she thought for a while, a good thought came into her head. The idea came like lightning behind her body, as she stared at her hand, thinking that perhaps she could draw since she was in Viola's body, and her hands might remember the movements, realizing with delight that from that moment on, she was Viola Helen. The lady looked at the blank canvas in front of her, knowing that right now, she should try to draw at least something in order to test her judgment. She decided to do it right now, because next to the canvas itself, there were also many brushes large and small, which Viola wanted to use to translate her inspiration into a drawing. But after some time, when the lady was carefully drawing various lines, outlines and strokes of dark and light colors on the canvas, Viola looked at her work in shock, realizing that everything was only getting worse. She turned pale beyond recognition as she held the brush in her hand and looked at her drawing, realizing that although she was in Viola's body and had her hands, she would never again have her abilities. The memories ended, and with them, the strength for the future, causing the main character to fall devastatedly onto the sofa, continuing to be pale with sadness and realizing that her situation was more complicated. However, even in such despair, the main character's eyes were wide open with motivation to do everything differently, to take her fate into her own hands, and try to change her entire new life, even if she was destined to die. Lowering her head again from her diligent thoughts, the lady remembered that according to the plot, Viola had an accident, and therefore it would not be surprising for many that she would lose her abilities for a while and generally change a little. Understanding only that now she would definitely not be able to compete with Robina due to her inability to draw, the lady decided to go back to the canvas and look at her drawing to see if everything was so bad. Taking the canvas in her hands, she just grinned and realized that she was definitely a terrible painter, and that she didn't even need any arguments for this, because when she looked at her uncertain strokes, incomprehensible and distorted, everything immediately became clear to her. But for the main character, this is what she needs, because she said this to herself with a smile, imagining the main couple of the novel behind her, realizing that in this case, she would not have to compete with Robina. In the beautiful room, the lady continued to stand and reflect on the fact that she was about to start a completely new life, which would not be at all similar to the one prepared for her in the novel. But at that moment, she heard a voice behind the door. The red-haired beauty glanced at the door and asked in shock who was standing there, but the sweet voice of a slightly frightened servant only clarified whether she could enter her chambers to perform her duties. Only when the main character allowed her to enter a cute and slightly anxious brown-haired girl appeared in her bedroom, who seems to be afraid of Viola because she looks at her with apprehension and fear. It seems that the lady remembered the maid's name because she had already read the novel before, and so, looking at her, she decided to address her as Gina. But she, hearing the lady address her directly, became even more frightened. Waving to the maid with one hand and touching her head with the other, the lady, with her eyes closed, explained to the maid that she was not going to scold her at all, as she had done before, but simply wanted to know what she needed. Until now, the frightened maid looked at Viola and informed her that she had to go to Lady Robina's meeting, and therefore she should help her get ready. But the red-haired beauty, looking at her, only said that in this case, she would get ready herself, and she would not need anyone's help. But upon hearing the lady's answer, Gina was on the verge of tears, which is why Viola compared her to a hamster that cries only out of fear that she will scold and scold her later. At that moment, the lady realized that she had to calm her down, which is why she forced her cheeks to spread into a smile that could only scare the maid half to death because she had scared everyone with her appearance before. Viola wanted to portray a warm smile, but all that came out of her was a terrible witch with a cunning, scary face, with which she looked at the servant, which made her turn away in fear, saying that she would rather leave her. The protagonist didn't even understand why the girl was afraid of her and wanted to quickly leave the room, which is why she continued to look somewhere in bewilderment, not understanding what she did wrong. But she had to prepare for the meeting itself, where the novel's main character would also be. So she decided to try on a red, slightly revealing dress, not understanding why all of Viola's outfits were so revealing. However, continuing to admire herself in the mirror, the lady posed and thought that this was the only outfit that suited her and that she liked, so she was not going to look at other dresses. Bowing her head forward, with a sly smile, the lady said to herself that although she had no talent, she really liked her body and especially her figure, hair, and face, and therefore did not regret being reborn. The main character seemed to be lit up by her own power, ready to show everyone the strength of her mediocrity, while next to her, behind the door, stood a frightened Jenna, asking the lady if she had finished getting ready. Having been inspired by her motivation, the lady raised her head and laughed like a true villain because she was about to show everyone her lost abilities, an absurdity, saying this jokingly, not seriously. But Jenna saw before her only the main character burning with anger and insidious plans, who was burning as if with real fire, which made her even more scared, realizing that Viola had changed dramatically. Time passed, and so the girl quickly got into a carriage with brown horses, after which, after some time, she arrived at the destination city, where the horses galloped at a marching pace along the stone road. Even while in the carriage, the lady could not get enough of the view, so she put her hand to the glass and looked out the carriage window in surprise, as if she had never seen anything like it in her life, although this was actually the case. The lady looked at the numerous medieval-style houses, which were not only neat, but also snow-white, which surprised Viola, who said to herself that everything around looked like a fairy tale. And a few minutes later, the red-haired beauty arrived at the palace of the novel's main character, which surprised her greatly, looking at Rabina's snow-white palace with amazement and a fist near her face as she was preparing to show herself. After looking at some of the elements in the garden of Rabina's castle, decorated with numerous trees and bushes, the girl realized that when she looked at all this, she began to accept a little that she had found herself in the world of a novel. There were also flowers in the palace garden that had a charming pink light past, which the beauty passed, realizing that her small but important wish had come true, and now she needed to prove herself. Therefore, Viola did not want to torment herself by waiting for the best moment and admiring the plants, because she immediately went to the main entrance of the castle to get to Robina's meeting and see her herself. As soon as the girl with garnet hair entered the room, the lady realized that inside it was also very beautiful and luxurious, which is why she turned her head, looking at the ceiling walls and carpeted floor. The main character herself was also not ordinary, because her blood-red dress stood out strongly against the soft white interior, looking moderately modest, but also interesting, thanks to which she did not remain in the shadows. She herself did not want to keep her friends waiting, so she immediately entered the room where all the ladies were already sitting, looking at them with her amber eyes, and greeting each of them at the meeting in a polite voice. But as soon as the main character said a word, all the girls in the office turned to her with expressions of bewilderment and disdain on their faces, interrupting their drawing processes for a second to look at Viola. The protagonist couldn't help but notice the unfriendly mood in the room, because even the most distant ladies didn't say anything to her, creating a dark aura around themselves and continuing to look at her with suspicion, while the ladies around them did not say a word, continued to draw, pretending not to notice her at all. The red-haired beauty herself walked alone closer to the center, realizing that no one was happy to see her. But once again, she closed her eyes with a smile and tried to cheer herself up, saying that not everything was so terrible, and she just needed to be patient, because now she would show everyone her mediocrity, and everyone would understand that she was worthless, and there was no need to pay any attention to her at all. With the thought that she should walk with a firm gait and ignore the company's disdain, Viola took a place at a distance from Rabina, intending not to see her again, but this surprised everyone. This was immediately noticed by Rabina, a white-haired lady with blue eyes, who looked at the heroine from behind the canvas and asked her why she did not sit next to her since she had saved her place. Viola tried to answer indifferently, and without unnecessary suspicion, so with her eyes closed, she said monotonously that today she wanted to paint here, and she was already picking up brushes. The story's protagonist's words touched Robin so much that she was about to cry the moment she heard Viola say those words, while behind her, a wary artist asked the heroine what she was planning. But when Robina's friends simply asked Violetta what was wrong with her, she, sitting in front of the canvas and crossing her arms, looked at them with such a terrible smile that everything around became darker and gloomier. It turns out that the lady was asking the girls what exactly they didn't like about her behavior, but the two friends never answered Viola's question because they were afraid of her, which is why one of them even started shaking. Other girls also looked at the heroine of the story, be it ladies with blue or green hair, and Viola felt their glances very well, but they could not diminish her confidence in her skill. Taking up the brush, the red-haired witch immediately drew it across the canvas, causing the green paint to spill across the paper, while she frowned at her creation like a true professional. Having gathered the strength to show everyone the true skill of a talentless artist, the lady after some time was able to depict on canvas not the vase of flowers itself, which was supposed to be painted, but only its outlines in geometric shapes. The girl looked at her own creation with bewilderment because she couldn't understand whether it was good or how others would react to it. But she knew one thing for sure. Her friends would clearly not be delighted since they expected more from her. She smiled even more sarcastically because she thought that everything was not so bad, and she had nothing to lose, so she would not regret anything, because in fact, she did not want to strive for success in drawing and art. With the thought that she was a completely free person, she watched the paintings that her competitors had painted earlier, already hung on the wall as a true ideal of beauty, because they were painted realistically. And unlike the most beautiful, refined light pink paintings in the style of realism, the painting of the main character looks very unusual, does not fit in with the surroundings, because it has bright colors and distinct figures. The red-haired lady looked at her creation as if she did not feel better or worse than them, but when she heard her friends talking nearby, she looked in that direction, worried that they were discussing her painting. The blue-haired and green-haired girls stared at the protagonist's painting while she was behind them, and tried to quietly pass by. But the two ladies continued to stare at Viola's drawing in surprise. But unexpectedly for the main character, the lady with green curls turned around and mouthed that she didn't think she could have such a creative and unique style as she demonstrated. The girl with garnet hair, who expected only words of disgust and indignation from the critics of her painting, was very surprised looking at the lady with her mouth open, not understanding why they liked her work. All this time, the protagonist stood near the talking aristocrats because she could not move from the shock she received from the lady's enthusiastic reviews, saying that her painting was even more unique than the others. The red-eyed lady lowered her head and became worried, wondering if they were saying this on purpose to offend her, or if they were making fun of her. To avoid creating a conflict, the aristocrat in red turned to the two beauties, and with a forced smile said that her painting really did look strange, and that she should give up painting. But all the girls did not confirm Viola's words, because they came closer to her and said that this was absolutely not true, because she used a very unusual drawing method, and she had talent. But the lady's behavior continued to look strange to the red-haired girl, so she looked at them in surprise, while each of the aristocrats looked at her and said that she was a gifted person. Looking at the creations that stood next to her work, the heroine realized that, unlike her talents, girls could truly depict a beautiful vase of flowers. And then the lady realized that she did not know how to draw at all. But when Viola looked again closely into the eyes of her colleagues, which glowed with sincerity and joy, persistence and truth, the protagonist believed that they were not mocking her. The heroine's surprised face seemed to turn blue, and she continued to look dumbfounded at every woman admiring her work. So she asked everyone to look at Robina's painting and see that it was better. There was indeed a blonde robin standing next to the lady standing hesitantly next to her work, while the main character pointed at her and said that even if she didn't try hard enough, her work still looked better. But the blue-eyed madame did not begin to prove her superiority over Viola, but instead looked at her longtime rival with regret and sadness, as if she was about to say that her words were not true. At that moment, all the girls fell silent, because they were afraid to say too much. So they modestly lined up in a row and hesitantly said that perhaps Robina's painting was better, but Viola's words were still a lie. But the girls still approached the red-haired beauty, closer, explaining to her, with a pinch of assertiveness, that she should show her work to the whole world. But at that moment, Robina stood nearby, as if in the shadows. Robina seemed to become sadder and sadder. Everything around her became white and empty, because the corners of her lips turned down either from sadness or from envy, because she looked at the girls who were giving all their attention to Viola. But what was the main character's surprise when Rabina, instead of stepping aside or remaining silent, put her hand on the shoulder of the astonished Viola, who looked at her while Rabina said that she thought so too. A slight blush appeared on the blue-eyed girl's face as she continued to look at the heroine and tell her that they should all put her painting on display for everyone to see so that many could see her talent. As soon as Robina smiled, the Garnet Lady even had to cover her hand from the fact that her fair-haired beauty flashed before her with her beauty and charm, which she had never seen anywhere else. But the words of those around her only left the protagonist of the story to think that if people in this world see her paintings differently, that is why they admire her work, which is already hanging on the wall for everyone to see. She even had thoughts about being called the local Picasso here, but by this time the meeting was already coming to an end because the red rays of the sunset fell on the aristocratic architecture in which the main character was located. Viola decided to drink her tea in silence, so she placed the mug with golden ornaments and tea in it on the table. But she never expected that at that moment someone would interrupt her peace and call her name. Next to her was a girl with short light hair who looked at the main character with a puzzled expression, asking if she was bored with their conversations. If she was silent, but Viola with a cup in her hand said that it was not so. Noticing the heroine's silence, the other girl said with a smile that perhaps she liked talking about men more than about paintings, but the lady with the bob haircut sitting next to her only became slightly nervous. But this did not embarrass the main character, because she only coquettishly adjusted a strand of her hair, smiling, and saying that she does not mind being the focus of men's attention, because she knows that they often like her. Then the same smiling lady, with a playful smile and long dark hair, smiled, saying with feigned joy that men liked Lady Robina more than she did. An awkward silence fell between the ladies, because they did not know how Robina herself would react to such words, but they were very surprised when she did not even get angry or laugh, but simply drank tea in silence nearby. Viola, with a cup in her hand, realized that Robina herself didn't seem to mind hearing this, so she replied with a sigh that she had paid attention to men before, but now she didn't need them. Having told her friends the truth, she began to drink tea calmly, because now that everything in her life had changed, she no longer wanted to chase after someone else's, and especially did not want to run after some aristocrats. The lady imagined her hand holding a brush with paint about to create a new masterpiece on a piece of paper, thinking that she wanted to live a quiet life, but if her paintings were recognized, she could fulfill her childhood dream. But at this time, the young ladies themselves, hearing from Viola that she no longer wished to be in the company of men, looked at her in astonishment and asked how she could even say such a thing. Viola just scratched her head, looking at her friends with a puzzled expression, and wondering what she had said that would make them so surprised by her sudden decision to no longer be in demand among men. However, the main character's thoughts and reflections largely disappeared when she noticed Robin with her eyes, but not the same as before, which surprised her incredibly and made her eyelids rise. The thing is, Robina's face became somehow dull and empty, and this is what alarmed the main character, because earlier she saw the fair-haired beauty with a smile, or at least with curiosity in her eyes. The other ladies continued to have fun and carry on the discussion with a smile on their faces, as did one of them, looking at Robina and asking her if the rumors that many were spreading about her were true. But at this time, Viola herself was watching only Robin, not understanding why her mood had suddenly become so changeable, and whether it was because of conversations about men and their attention. She seemed to perk up a bit as she looked at her friends with curiosity when the girls around her began asking her about the rumors. Like, is it true that she recently got engaged to Duke Evan himself? One dark-haired beauty in a blue dress even rubbed her hands and told Robina with a smile that they were incredibly suitable for each other, but they wanted to know more details about her secrets and relationships. But when the conversation turned to a person like Evan, a light bulb seemed to go on in the heroine's head, causing her to raise her eyelids in surprise, once again realizing that this was the main male character in the novel. Viola immediately imagined Duke Evan and Robina as a couple, thinking that the plot of the story she found herself in was still developing very quickly, even faster than she expected, because as she understood, they were already a couple. Imagining his smile in her head among the bright angelic light, the heroine realized that, judging by the description from the book she had read earlier, he had an incredible appearance and a noble face. The lady also imagined him in clothes appropriate for aristocrats, or more precisely, in a snow-white uniform with gold elements, because he is not a simple nobleman, but a respected duke. Tilting her head, the garnet-haired girl thought about how incredibly attractive he was, and how she would be attracted to him if he were free. But Robin only said that she was happy for her happiness. But immediately after her words, a deep silence fell, because all the ladies fell silent and looked in surprise at the already agitated heroine, who realized that she had spoken as if she envied Robin and her love. While drinking tea, the girl told herself to sit quietly from now on, and not say anything unnecessary if she didn't want everyone around her to misunderstand her words and consider her an envious person, a lady with bad manners. And so a beautiful crimson evening arrived in the world of the main character, which she encountered for the first time, and in which she first saw Robin, learned about her abilities, met others, and enjoyed the beauty. She was about to leave because everyone else had left the tea party and gone home, but when someone appeared in front of Viola, she turned sideways to him because she heard her name from this person. Viola wanted to turn around and go about her business, but she couldn't do that because Robina kept up with her, appearing from behind and saying that she urgently needed to talk to her about an important matter. Then, the lady in red turned to the blue-eyed girl, asking what she meant. But Robina was in no hurry to speak, as if she was embarrassed or did not know where to begin an extremely frank conversation. Robina remained silent, and this made Viola wary, causing her to look at her with bewilderment, not understanding why her fair-haired friend was so hesitant and in no hurry to ask her for what she came for. Robina surprised Viola even more, because she was on the verge of tears from the words she was trying to say, while she looked at her fingers which were touching each other at the tips. Out of desperation and confusion, Viola wanted to wave her arms, which she imagined in her head, while Robina continued to stand there, trying to muster up the courage just to say a few words. Then the girl with blue eyes wanted to wipe away the tears, with her eyes looking down, and whispering to Viola that she really didn't want the long-awaited engagement with Duke Evan. In the dark garden, where the foliage of the trees was illuminated only by the golden rays of the sunset, Viola was in shock and did not rush to conclusions. She asked Robina in a stunned voice what she was saying, because she did not believe her words. Placing her hand with a red glove on her shoulder, the red-haired beauty looked at the robin and asked why she did not want to marry the Duke, not stopping to think that he was the main character for her. And when Robina answered Viola that she knew that he would not love and appreciate her, the main character only smiled, looking into her face, because she knew perfectly well that this was not true, because in the novel, they were a wonderful couple. The girl remembered the very pages of the novel in pink tones, remembering that they were the most beautiful couple of all, and therefore this simply could not be, which is why she did not believe Robina's words. Trying to calm the blonde down, the lady in the red dress said with a smile that she shouldn't worry so much, because everything would be fine after the engagement. But in response, Robina only burst into tears from despair, explaining that the Duke doesn't even touch her, and she's even starting to believe some rumors about him. Then Lady Viola lowered her hand from Robina's shoulder to her forearm, for her interlocutor's last sentence had made her remember some important detail about the Duke himself. Remembering his face with snow-white hair and the same light eyes, Viola remembered that despite his handsome appearance and incredible manners, there were indeed very strange rumors circulating around such a duke. Because of this, she looked at Robina with bewilderment, because she did not understand whether she meant that her future groom was a castrate, that is, a man who did not have his dignity in his pants. Then the main character remembered that, while reading the novel, she often imagined the Duke surrounded by his fans who really wanted his attention, but he just ignored them as if he didn't want to see any lady. Viola even remembered that there were also rumors that the Duke liked women if he did not pay attention to any beauty, and this is what she imagined in her head, the Duke himself, in the company of another guy. Realizing this, the lady in red with her lips parted tried to say whether this was what worried her, but Robina only said that she was saddened by the lack of love between them, because they did not even hug or touch. The modest girl with blue eyes and in a blue dress touched her hands and adopted a more modest pose because she was about to tell Viola what she had come to her for. Looking at the heroine of the story again with heavenly eyes, the girl who was about to burst into tears from the hopelessness and complexity of her situation, asked Viola if she was her friend. Each new word from the modest woman surprised the protagonist even more, which is why she continued to look at her with stupor and bewilderment, saying that everything was as she said, but she did not understand what she was getting at. The white-haired beauty turned pink again and looked at her friend, asking if they were close, after all, if she could do what she asked of hers. In response, Violetta only turned blue, continuing to look at Robina with silent emotions and thinking only about the fact that it was already impossible to refuse her request if she made such sweet eyes and face. But what Robina asked of her still surprised Viola, because she, approaching the astonished beauty even closer, asked her if she could seduce Duke Evan for her. The main character's face immediately turned pale from shock, and she didn't even know what to say, so she just frowned, looking at her friend and asking what she meant by that expression. The red-haired beauty immediately folded her hands, closed her eyes, and said that she would not do such a thing, and that she had never heard such strange and absurd requests addressed to her as the one Robina told her. Being near a beautiful, clean, and snow-white fountain, Robina tried to convince Viola, saying that the Duke was castrated and she still didn't like such men, which is why it would be easy for her to help her. But the main character refused again. The confused protagonist grabbed her head, causing everything around her to become darker and seemed to flash with lightning, while she herself panicked, saying that in this case, everything would be exactly as described in the book. The girls continued to stand in the gazebo and talk next to each other when Robina told her friends that she had no one else to ask for help, and if she responded to her request, then everything would be resolved very soon. But when another brilliant thought came into the red-haired beauty's head, everything around her seemed to become brighter, and she herself allowed her eyes to shine, because she realized that in essence, she was only fulfilling Viola's request. Realizing that in this case they would definitely not fall in love with each other, the heroine imagined the Duke's body and remembered that he could become an excellent model for her to pose and paint. Having imagined the Duke as if on a piece of paper with a wanted poster, she realized that she just wanted to try a new style in painting, and in the case of Evan, she would not have to mess around for long because she would break off the engagement very easily. The lady mainly thinks this way because she knows Evan's main secret, which is why she imagines him as if drawn on a wanted list, where he himself is pinned to the wall with various papers. And as soon as the main character said even one word that meant that she agreed to fulfill the request, Robina seemed to glow with happiness, even more looking at her with a smile and joy, thanking her for the service. It was already dark around the gazebo because of the night, and it was at this time that the ladies finished their conversation by agreeing on the favor, and how much Robina thanked Viola for her consent. Realizing that she knew more about her new target, the red-haired lady imagined his serious face and white hair, recalling that he was not talkative with women and also avoided touching. The lady wrote down all these characteristics on a piece of paper with a pen in order to create a complete portrait of a cold, silent, handsome man with an imperturbable face who is quite attractive to her. She even imagined him above her, gifted with sunlight, because she was afraid that he would glow with his beauty, just like Robin, which would force Viola to wear glasses. But the lady continued to sit at her desk, bending her head over the letter, and writing down more and more details, realizing that he would be her ideal partner as a model for her incredible painting. However, looking at the sheet of paper with her red sparkling eyes, Viola thought not only about others and helping them, but also about herself, or more precisely, about how others today would react to her first painting, which was quite unusual. Her hair fell obediently on her shoulders, while she thought to herself that judging by the girl's reaction to her creation, she should continue making art. And about this, she had a good idea. She imagined in her mind a large but blank canvas, unused paints next to it, boxes and cardboard, thinking that perhaps she could still be creative in this world. Several days passed very quickly, thanks to which, over the castle where the main character lives, a blue sky with light clouds once again reigned, giving everyone only peace and happiness. Viola realized that the opportunity to meet the Duke for the first time had come to her sooner than she thought, because that very day, all their paintings were put on display, where various ladies and gentlemen admired them. In her head, the girl called this day the moment of her shame, because only because of her friend's request, she had to wear a chic black dress, even a little provocative, to attract the Duke's attention. The red-haired beauty couldn't help but notice that her dress was working as it should, because many of the men around her immediately blushed and looked at her with their mouths open, but didn't dare to come closer, because they were shy. But unlike the modest men, the main character was not so reserved, because with her red eyes, she looked straight at the guys admiring her, with such a look as if she slightly did not understand their manners. She decided to look at them with anger, also asking what exactly they decided to stare at. And this was enough for all the aristocrats to instantly turn away from her out of shame and awkwardness. But Viola's slightly angry mood was interrupted in time by Robin, who appeared next to her, and immediately gifted her friend with the radiance of her incredible blue dress when she herself informed her that the Duke was already here. Robina informed her friend about the arrival of the most important guest, and looking at Viola's black and red dress, she wanted to say that something was wrong with it. But the heroine only put her hands on her belt, not understanding what was going on. Then the girl remembered that, as she herself knows, Viola dresses very revealingly, which she imagined next to her head, and thought that revealing outfits are quite usual for Viola. In order to calm Robin down, Viola put her hand on her shoulder, also giving her a thumbs up as if to suggest that everything was under control. Because if she knew how people dressed in the world she lived in before, she would not even consider her dresses revealing and indecent. But when it came time to look at the Duke himself, the protagonist realized that she did not see him anywhere. And in the gallery, she noticed only ladies in pink dresses looking at paintings and admiring other art. The heroine herself stood not far from the paintings themselves, near a snow-white column, reasoning that this was entirely expected for her because she already knew about the Duke's modesty and his desire to be alone. But when the lady came up with the idea that he loved modest, secluded places, she decided to go to the balcony, where she noticed the Duke himself, who was showing off his snow-white beauty to nature. But he also stood near the balcony and admired the sunsets and tree branches. But he was not destined to be alone this time, because the protagonist of the story behind him decided to start a conversation by asking about the paintings. Hearing the young lady's voice, the blonde-haired Duke instantly turned around with stunned eyes, alarmed by the mere realization that there was a lady standing next to him. But he also quickly turned back to the sunset, while the heroine in red continued to stand behind him, with her arms crossed, trying to get him to talk, muttering now about the breeze, now about the weather, now about the beautiful nature. Looking at the dawn from the towers on which the sunset light fell evenly, Viola realized that, judging by the silence, the Duke was in no hurry to chat with her. But she needed to start a conversation in order to quickly begin her plan. She continued to look at his back with bewilderment, raising her palm to her face, and thinking that this would not work, but she knew his main secret, so it would be difficult for him to get rid of her. The Duke continued to look at the sunset as if there was no one behind him, but in fact Viola was thinking that although Robina was worried that he would not love her, she was sure that he would fall head over heels in love with her. But when the lady thought something about castration, the protagonist of the story only looked away, because she realized that there was no exact information about this. But she was also not sure that the Duke was completely healthy. Indecent thoughts about what was in the Duke's pants made the lady look intently there, as if she wanted to quickly find out whether it was true that he did not have his main asset. But she was unlucky, because at that very moment, Duke Evan decided to turn to her and ask what was the matter, while the red-haired girl herself was frightened by his behavior and surprise. And the Duke himself, who was clearly dissatisfied with the main character's manner, looked at her with anger and gloomy eyes, asking where she had just been staring and what she wanted from him. The girl just grabbed her head with her hand, while the man looked at her so intently and with such displeasure that it seemed like a blue cloud of anger was about to form around him. But she said that she herself hadn't noticed where her eyes were directed. But she became even more confused when she turned her head and realized that Robina was also hiding behind the curtain behind her, clearly waiting for action. And then Viola realized that she needed to act quickly. She dared to take the first steps towards the Duke, showing him her red shoes dress and confidence, which made Evan instantly tremble, as if they were the main danger of his life. The girl did not limit her beauty to just dresses and shoes, and therefore she strove to quickly charm the man with her pomegranate red hair, which swayed beautifully in the light breeze. Coming closer to the Duke, the beautiful and charming lady tried to seduce him with a smile, asking if she could make him one small but very interesting offer. The guy turned sideways to her, as if he didn't want to have any contact with the lady at all. But he still looked at her with a disdainful gaze, asking what other proposal she wanted to make him. Duke Evan was even more surprised when the smiling girl showed him her goodwill and said that she would only help him. But the stranger's mysterious offers only made the aristocrat wary. He continued to look at her with aloofness, asking how she could help him if she herself was Viola Helen, a person whom everyone knew well because of her ambiguous reputation. When the lady appeared in front of him on the balcony, the white-haired guy admitted that he knew very well what kind of person she was, and therefore was surprised by her intentions. The lady just put her hand on her cleavage, thinking that she understood the reason for Evan's neglect. So she turned her head towards him and said with a smile that he should not strain himself because of her. But even so, the white-haired Duke turned away from her, closing his eyes and saying with a gloomy face that she was absolutely not the kind of person for whom he would strain himself, especially since he did not need her. The girl continued to stand behind him, her red hair blowing in the wind, also asking the man if he was interested in what kind of help she was offering. But Evan once again said that he did not need her attention. At that moment, the heroine looked at Robin, who continued to stand and peek from behind the curtain, hoping that Viola would succeed at any moment. And then she realized that she needed to act faster and more accurately. Viola decided to slip up to the white-haired handsome man's face and quietly whisper to him that he would refuse even if she knew his biggest secret. And from these words, the Duke's eyes widened. He instantly turned to her, and with an angry face and puzzled eyes, asked what she meant, when his rough voice even made the space around her darker and gloomier, as if he didn't like the heroine. Only then did the white-haired handsome man turn to the protagonist with a face as if he wanted to hear the details from her. And thanks to this, the lady realized that it seemed she had made him doubt his choice. At that moment, she imagined him as a white cat who hissed at her and wanted to bite off her hand only because he was touching him and annoying her too much, but this only played into her hands. The couple found themselves on the balcony under the red rays of the sunset, when the main character, suspicious to the man, began to approach him closer and closer, which is why Evan moved away from her, asking what she was doing. But Viola didn't seem to listen to him and didn't answer. She just continued to come closer to him, which made the Duke even more embarrassed and stepped back fearfully, opening his lips and asking her what was the matter. Viola continued to carry out her plan, which is why she extended her hand with a dark glove to the Duke, saying in a pleasant voice that she knew his secret very well, and what would happen if she touched it. The lady extended her hand right to the worried man's face, which is why she was about to touch him, which was what was causing him such anxiety. But she continued to speak as if she knew perfectly well what would happen next. Unable to bear the suspicious behavior of the young beauty, the blonde leaned back from her and covered his face with his hand, looking at Viola with an embarrassed look and telling her to immediately stop her strange behavior and manners. But this was exactly what the girl was trying to achieve, which is why a sly and wide smile instantly appeared on her face, when she also slyly said through it that she thought he would fall for her trick. She moved her hand down to his chest, while continuing to look straight into his eyes, causing Evan to blush and stand still, also asking him if his body would become very hot if she touched it. At that moment, the Duke's eyes opened so wide in surprise that he himself did not know what to say to the lady, who really knew too much about him, and willingly took advantage of it, manipulating him. Viola clearly felt that she had touched Evan, which is why she continued to look at him with garnet eyes and say that she knew his main secret, and if he refused her offer, it would be bad. Having imagined in her head a certain piece of paper with the ducal symbols, the lady remembered that thanks to the novel, she knew very well that in the Duke's family, one disease was passed down from generation to generation. Also, imagining the Duke, who seemed to be chained by a bunch of hands, forcing him to feel indignation. Viola repeated to herself that touching a woman caused a heat in the body, which is why it was chained to the bed. After that, she introduced Robin and Evan as a couple, recalling that this disease would disappear on its own if the Duke met his love, and no one knew whether it was a curse or an illness. The main character remembered all this thanks to a book that had already lost its content, making it empty. But the red-haired beauty still looked at it, lying in bed, and thinking about how romantic it was. She pressed the blue book to her face, looking away, thinking and dreaming that this was all very spiritual, especially an illness the cure for which was only true love. Viola even imagined in her head a white-haired prince in the role of Snow White, who lies in a coffin and waits to be kissed by the very lady whose love will wake him up and cure him of his incurable disease. And thanks to the fact that she already knew about the disease, she now stands in front of the Duke and manipulates him with a smile so that she will help him in something, so that he gets rid of this disease. The red-haired cunning lady could only cover her smile with her hand and look at the Duke, who turned away from her, worried and wondering what would happen if he agreed and what would happen if he refused. Noticing that her interlocutor was standing and staring at her with empty, confused eyes, the heroine said with a smile that he shouldn't look at her like that, because she was offering help not for free, but for a certain service. Imagining the Duke's naked body next to her, who seemed to be posing for her, the heroine decided to immediately notify Evan, grinning and saying that in exchange for saving her from illness, she wanted him to be her model for the painting. Although the lady's words about posing for Karina were half a joke to make Evan believe in her intentions, the Duke continued to stand in front of her seriously and ask what she had in mind, while Viola answered that nothing of the sort. In response, the man only frowned once again, asking the lady what she wanted and telling her that he did not understand her intentions. And then Viola realized that her victim was a tough nut to crack if he did not want to agree quickly. The lady decided to turn her head away and arrogantly say that he was not at all her type, so he should not think that she wanted to bewitch him or make him fall in love with her, but simply wanted to help and receive a favor. The already astonished guy was even more surprised by the lady's words, that she liked more assertive and persistent men, which is why the white-haired aristocrat looked at her with genuine shock. The girl immediately noticed the Duke's very surprised face, which is why she also looked at him with bewilderment, not understanding what she had said, because there seemed to be nothing unusual in her words about men. The couple continued their discussion on the balcony of the beautiful and perfect castle, which was evenly bathed in the late sunset light, and when Evan asked Viola why she was trying to help someone who wasn't even her type, the lady only said that she wanted a quiet life, and all this was just for her sake. The lady's lips parted as she decided to confess to the man that she had previously imitated Rabina all her life, trying to surpass her in everything. But now she no longer strived for this, but desired peace. The Duke looked at the sincere girl with his mouth open, while she continued to speak, with a smile, saying that she realized her worth and therefore would not strive for the good of others, because now she wanted to help him and Rabina be together. The white-haired handsome man was speechless with surprise, so he looked at the lady with his lips parted, while she said that she wanted him and Rabina to be a real couple and not just husband and wife on paper. Then the inspired heroine put one hand to her waist and pointed somewhere to the side with the other, saying that if he doesn't believe her words, then let him look where she points him. Soon the couple looked where Madame wanted, namely at her painting in the gallery, which they both stared at, and which Viola began to tell Evan about, saying that it symbolized the beginning of her new life. Looking down, the red-haired beauty muttered that her proposal was quite good, since he had chosen Rabina for the engagement, which meant that he did like her to some extent. Only the words of another girl made the Duke remember Robina's charming smile, which like a small ray of light should be among the sunflowers in a modest light dress and hat. Still, the calm and cold Evan wanted to tell Viola that she was mistaken in some of her judgments, but she immediately brought her index finger to his lips, ordering him to be silent, because she herself understood everything perfectly well. Immediately after this, she confidently turned away from him and clasped her hands behind her back, saying that she already knew everything, and she didn't need his extra words to understand that there were some feelings between them. Imagining Rabina's incredible beauty, her hair and modesty, Viola admitted that she had previously envied her because she was so sweet and incredible, attracting attention. Deciding to further press on Evan's doubts, she turned to him with a sly face and a sly smile, saying that she too would definitely get her, and even more than she herself loved her. The Duke could not help but succumb to the beautiful words of a woman who could so easily convince him, which is why he sighed, closed his eyes, and lowered his head, saying only what seemed to be clear to him. He had already asked the lady what would happen if he agreed, but she wouldn't be able to lift the curse, to which Viola, looking at him with a slightly blue face, answered calmly that she would only be sorry that she wouldn't be able to draw him naked, although in fact she imagined herself smiling behind him, who said that then she would take full responsibility upon herself. But the lady's words that she wanted to paint him naked surprised the Duke so much that he clenched his fist and looked at her with great displeasure, which made the red-haired lady begin to worry. He put his hands to his chest, blushing with embarrassment, and asking if, when she said he was a model, she meant that he would pose for her completely naked. Eldie, throwing up her hands, tried to smooth things over by saying that she had heard rumors that he was a castrato, and that was why she thought he would be an ideal model for a painting. But the Duke continued to stand there and ask what she had said. And as soon as the heroine said the word castrato again, which is used to describe men who lack their main asset, Evan's eyes once again widened in surprise and incredible shock. At that very moment, he began to shake incredibly from embarrassment and anxiety, while Viola, who noticed this, tried to say that she didn't think at all that he was somehow different. But the guy moved his lips and tried to explain that everything was wrong. The young man bowed his head, overcome with emotion, and blushed even more, closing his eyes and frowning with difficulty, telling his interlocutor that he was not a castrato and that she was thinking about him incorrectly. The guy even grabbed his head and turned it away, saying with difficulty why he should even explain this to some lady, while the red-haired lay in front of him looked at him with curiosity and slight surprise. The story's main character only smiled, looking at the Duke and telling him that from now on she would not consider him a castrato if he was so uncomfortable with the topic. When the Duke had a look of devastation on his face, Viola said that this was proof of her good intentions, because she would not call the man she liked a castrato, and then Evan said that he understood everything. As soon as the heroine realized that the man had nevertheless agreed to cooperate with her as a sign of gratitude, she wanted to touch him, but knowing about his illness, she did it in a unique way by grabbing him by the clothes. Taking her friend's hand, in the same way she began waving it up and down, imitating a handshake, and saying that she was incredibly glad to meet him, while Evan, himself in shock, could not understand how many more oddities Viola concealed within herself. She put a welcoming smile and joy on her face, thinking that she knew perfectly well that she shouldn't touch him if she didn't want to send heat to him, and that's why she only touched his sleeves. After some time, she returned to the gallery, but there were surprises waiting for her there too, because she noticed that the visitors were not looking at all the paintings, but were crowding around one, looking at it with surprise. But the lady did not understand the strange behavior of the people, which is why she looked at them with surprise, while curiosity awakened in her head, pushing her to find out what the crowd liked so much. When she came closer, everything became clear because a crowd of people were looking only at her colorful picture, while she herself grabbed her head and realized that she was attracting attention to herself again. People, it seems, only experienced emotions of shock and curiosity, with which they looked at the work, forcing the heroine to think that it was a real shame for her if everyone was so surprised by her creation. The heroine hid behind a column out of fear, but was even more amazed when people began to say that the technique in her work was incredibly unique and that they had never seen anything like it, something that made them unable to take their eyes off the painting. Even a professional-looking artist, with a mustache and a hat, thoughtfully said that everything in the painting was thought out down to the smallest detail, although Viola didn't even think about what colors were best to use when creating it. Remembering herself in a past life, who often heard only empty insults from others, which made her angry, the heroine thought that people here were behaving strangely if they suddenly began to praise her work. But even the lady with green hair with her lips parted asked people if this was Lady Viola's masterpiece, while the artist himself stood nearby and looked at it because he was afraid of public attention. The girl wanted to slip away from the gallery unnoticed so that no one would see her again, But she didn't succeed, as she immediately stopped when she heard Robin's voice calling her from behind. She seemed to want to cry from despair, but she held back, not understanding why her fair-haired friend was so attentive, precisely at those moments when she needed to quietly escape from prying eyes. Turning around, Viola immediately noticed several people staring at her in shock, and because of this, the heroine thought that they despised her for copying Robin. But she wanted them all to notice how her style had changed and how she no longer tried to outdo her friend in drawing. But imagine Viola's surprise when one man, putting his hand to his face, said that her drawing style had become much better, and the lady next to him with blue eyes only agreed, saying that she herself did not recognize her creation. Thanks to this, the atmosphere in the gallery was much softer, and it seemed that the other paintings with warm tones also shone with a pleasant light from the kindness of everyone present, thanks to which the heroine smiled. Taking advantage of the moment when everyone was looking at her, the main character decided to turn to the surprised Robin and say that now Noah will not imitate her and envy her, but is going to follow her own path. The white-haired beauty with pigtails and the same angelic eyes stared at Viola with genuine shock, saying her name as if to say that not everything was so bad, and there was no need to apologize. But the protagonist of the story continued to insist on her own, closing her eyes and parting her lips in order to personally apologize to Rabina if she had offended or hurt her in any way. She also decided to get even closer to the blue-eyed girl, who was shaking with excitement, continuing to say that her paintings were simply amazing, and for this reason, she wanted to copy her and also wanted to be as bright as she was. Viola even took Rabina's hands in hers in order to make closer contact with her, continuing to say that she now loves herself as she is and also respects Rabina and her work. Looking into the girl's eyes with her red eyes that shone with hope and sincere emotions, Viola once again asked Rabina to forgive her if she had caused her pain or inconvenience because of her envy. There was only light and joy in the heroine's eyes because she was no longer the same gloomy person she had been, and she no longer wanted to be one, since she understood that now was the most opportune moment for her evil essence to finally go away. This is exactly what Viola wanted to achieve, looking at her former sworn rival with a smile and asking her for forgiveness, so that everyone present would no longer see her as an evil person who wanted to harm everyone. Robina seemed to be in no hurry to speak, because her lips did not move, and her face drooped slightly as if she was feeling ashamed or awkward, but her friend's words still touched her. But the next moment, she was already smiling like a bright angel with wings, who sincerely smiled at Viola and said that she of course forgives her, because they are close friends. Viola had to turn away from Rabina because she was once again emitting an incredible light that blinded her eyes. And besides, the heroine, embarrassed, could not believe that she really looked like an angel. Then she looked at the other people around her, especially at the mustachioed artist and the lady next to him, who were smiling, which indicated that it seemed that Viola's role as a villain was over. The two girls continued to stand next to each other, while Robina seemed a little embarrassed, folding her hands together and looking at the floor, saying that this was not the right place to talk. Realizing that the lady most likely wanted to talk to Violetta alone, the heroine suggested that she go to the garden, where there was a snow-white chic fountain and tall trees, where there was not a soul. When the extra eyes disappeared and the conversations of others stopped distracting her friend, Robina turned to Viola and immediately asked with a smile how she managed to seduce Evan so quickly and easily the first time. In response, the red-haired beauty only laughed, saying that everything was going as it should. And while Robina looked at her, saying that she herself saw that she had managed to get very close to him on that balcony, Robina seemed to be clenching her fist with mixed emotions, also quietly saying that she understood everything but Viola. Noticing that her friend was not finishing something, asked if she wanted to ask her anything else. With her lips parted, the devastated and thoughtful lady with light braids wanted to ask Viola why she had suddenly changed so drastically, but because of her muttering, the heroine only asked again what she wanted to tell her. The two ladies stood on the bridge, under which the Avda was bubbling, and next to which there was a large fountain, where Viola continued to ask the quiet and silent Robin what exactly she wanted to ask. But Rabina, apparently deciding not to raise the strange topic and not to ask personal questions, nodded her head, closed her eyes, and also told the red-haired madam that she did not want to know anything special from her. The blonde decided to just smile sweetly at her friend, blushing and telling her that from now on, she only trusted her even if she actually had questions about why she had changed so much. Being near the fountain, the crystalline water, of which only decorated their walk, the protagonist of the story asked Robin if they could then go back if they had discussed everything that needed to be discussed. But what was Viola's surprise when she was not allowed to take a single step by a stranger with dark skin and blue hair who grabbed her hand and loudly asked how much longer she would run from him. In front of the protagonist stood not only a dark-skinned guy, but a man who clearly had a claim on her if he looked at her with displeasure and asked why she had changed so much and for what reason she was not paying attention to him. Looking into the stranger's red, aggressive eyes, his tanned skin, and long hair, the heroine immediately remembered that, according to the plot, he is a close friend of Viola and has the name Theo, but now he shows himself to be a bore. But it seems that the heroine was not so much surprised by him as she was astonished by his bad manners, which allowed him to grab her wrist so hard that she looked at him with bewilderment and incomprehension. But at that very moment, she frowned with anger and rage when she remembered that, according to the plot, it was him who was seduced by the past Viola. But now she doesn't like him at all because of his incredible rudeness and bad manners. Soon a real quarrel began between the couple, in which they both shouted at each other, while the red-haired beauty ordered Theo to let go of her hand, while the man himself asked her why she was running away from him. The girl even felt a strong pain, which made the world around her become darker, and she closed her eyes because the guy continued to hold her hand, saying that he would not let her go until she told him why she was ignoring him. The tall man didn't even think of letting go of the lady's wrist, so Viola had to give in, which is why she said that she didn't think there was anything between them, so she didn't want his attention. But this only angered Theo. Veins appeared on his face with anger as he shouted at Viola and looked at her, saying that this wouldn't do because he still had something to tell her, so she wouldn't go anywhere until she heard him out. All this time, a frightened Rabina stood behind the man, and Theo turned to her, telling her that it would be better to leave them alone now because they would begin a private conversation that would take place without any extra people present. Rabina, apparently not realizing that an aggressive man could pose a danger to her friend, calmly responded to Theo's request, saying that in that case she would leave and leave them alone. And Viola was left to watch in amazement as the Robin actually walked around her from behind and went into the palace, while the heroine looked at her with wide eyes, not believing that she would actually leave her. While Rabina walked towards the palace and didn't even look back, the protagonist herself only thought that she had mistakenly considered her an angel, if now she could clearly see her friend's discomfort and obey the requests of an unethical stranger. With a puff of air into her cheek from excitement, the lady realized that in this situation, she would have to act quickly and not rely on the help of others, if her friend herself had abandoned her and left her alone with a very inadequate person. With these thoughts in mind, the girl slammed her sharp stiletto heel with all her might, causing the man to instantly cry out in pain, which also forced him to immediately let go of the lady's hand, which he was still holding. All he could do was walk away shamefully from the main character, who holding her hands victoriously on her hips, smiling as she watched the scoundrel go, asking him if he had any idea that she really wanted him to let her go. But when the lady looked at her wrist, she instantly stopped laughing, because in the place where the man had held her, there remained an unpleasant redness that hurt from small scratches and abrasions. Viola looked with disgust at the wound the man had left her, as if it were the most disgusting thing he could have done to her. But she had no choice, because now she had to somehow punish the inadequate man for what he had done. Unable to bear it, she showed him her fist, while he himself was sitting on the ground, because the pain in his heel forced him to stop walking, and thus he was left to look at the heroine, threatening him with reprisals if she saw him again. But the surprises didn't end there, because behind her, the girl noticed Robina, who for some unknown reason was reaching out either to her or to Theo, causing Viola to look at her in surprise. Turning to her, the red-haired lady wanted to tell her friend with a smile that she was okay, and there was no need to worry, but she herself did not notice how Robina leaned not towards her, but towards Theo, anxiously shouting out his name. Viola could only turn white and turn to stone in shock, which is what she wanted to do, not understanding what had just happened, and whether she was right in understanding that Robina was more worried about the inadequate person than about her. She even fell on her knees in front of him, asking if the same thing could happen to him as to the Duke. But Theo only looked at her with displeasure and said that everything was fine with him, and only his foot hurt, while Viola looked at them and realized that she could not recover from the shock. Viola had only to return back to the palace with a strange emptiness, looking somewhere to the side, and thinking that she would never have guessed that Robina and Theo were closer than she was to her. But Viola didn't have to be bored for long, because as soon as she appeared in the room, Duke Evan immediately turned to her, calmly saying that it seemed that Robina valued Theo more than her as a friend. However, Viola only lowered her eyes to the floor, as if from sadness and misunderstanding, telling the Duke that she did not know anything concrete about this, since he himself could not understand whether she was dear to Robina or not. Remembering her appearance, her face, her innocent eyes, and her blonde hair, the girl thought that of course she knew how sweet and kind she was, but before she couldn't even think that this was all just an image, and now she was at a loss. Continuing to look down, the girl whose beauty was not only in her garnet hair and red eyes, but also in her kind, bright-changed soul, said that most likely she needed to wait until Robina opened her heart to her. But Evan wasn't worried about Viola's feelings or her relationship with her friend, because when he looked at her, he said that her hand looked very strange, and most likely it hurt a lot. The red-haired beauty, indifferent to everything, said that she was immensely grateful to him for his concern, after which she immediately asked if he should go to Robina if he was interested in her, and if she was currently with someone else. Viola didn't even think about it, although she could have noticed that while she was talking to Evan, her white-haired friend was walking near the fountain with an unknown man, which is why she told the Duke directly that in this situation, he should show jealousy because she was now with a strange man. But it seems that Evan had no intention of saving Robin from other men's attention, because he approached the heroine and, looking into her eyes, asked why he should be jealous, and then Viola said that they were a couple, and the protagonist's face instantly changed when the guy standing next to her replied that right now he was more concerned with her than some Robin. And only because of this phrase, Viola's face became stronger, and her eyes became larger. The couple continued talking in a cozy room with snow-white columns and chandeliers, near which the heroine explained to Evan that the wound on her hand was not serious, so now he had better worry about Robin. As soon as the white-haired handsome man said that he didn't understand it, the black-haired lady standing next to him shouted for him to run to her quickly because this was his chance. But she didn't even see how someone had already appeared behind her. This stranger turned out to be Theo himself, behind whom Robina had been hiding until now, and who was standing not far from Viola, as if he was about to do something unexpected because of his anger and rage at her. With an angry, dissatisfied face, the blue-haired man with golden eyes opened his mouth wide and shouted Viola's name as if he now wanted to deal with her or take revenge for any possible inconvenience. He showed the couple his fist in displeasure, also asking the main character how she could so shamelessly seduce someone behind his back, while Viola herself stood next to Evan and could not understand what was happening. What surprised the young lady even more was that the dark-skinned man not only threatened with words, but also took very strange poses as if he was about to jump on Viola with his fists due to loss of control. Evan in turn continued to stand next to the red-haired heroine, telling the inadequate aristocrat to stop fooling around right now, while the protagonist herself was afraid of him, to the point of turning blue in the face. There was genuine confusion on her face, with which she looked at the man, while in her head she seemed to be clutching her head and did not know where to go because Evan was too stubborn and did not understand that he needed to go to Robina. But it was too late to react, because the inadequate man immediately decided to punish Viola for something, which is why he swung his hand behind his head, continuing to look at his victim and getting ready to hit her with all his might. With the thought that she could still endure one blow, the woman with crimson hair closed her eyes, preparing to take the full blow from the strong hand of someone she had known for a short time and who had already used force before. But when she felt that the blow was taking a suspiciously long time to come, she opened her eyes, not understanding anything, and raising her hands to her face. But she also saw that Evan was no longer standing next to her, but standing in front, as if protecting her from someone. Opening her eyes wider, the heroine realized with surprise that she was hiding behind the back of a snow-white angelic man who would not let an unknown hooligan harm her, but would sacrifice himself for her good like a true gentleman. The Duke said in a firm voice that this was already the most humiliating thing for him and unacceptable for everyone, while he himself firmly held the hand of the dark-skinned inadequate, which made it tremble with fear and surprise. The main character could only look in amazement and fascination at the back and face of the one who protected her. Even though she had previously brought only troubles and had a very bad reputation, the one whose heart should have belonged to Robina, as well as his attention with love, looked away to Viola and asked if this was the assertive man she had told him about earlier, and who was with the blue-eyed girl. Turning to the protagonist, the calm yet strong Duke said that he saw no manners in this tanned hooligan, which made him look more like a wild horse than a man or an aristocrat. Viola seemed to have nothing to say, because she looked at her savior with her mouth slightly open, looking into his eyes, but not believing that he was now protecting her, and not busy with Robina. Meanwhile, Theo himself was becoming even more angry, causing the veins to appear again on his dark face, as he, gritting his teeth, told the Duke that it would be better for him not to interfere in his affairs, since he wanted to deal with Viola himself. But Evan had no intention of retreating, because he only closed his eyes and slightly bowed his head, asking Theo how he could remain calm if before his eyes some psycho was raising his hand to a defenseless lady. Opening his eyes, which no longer shone with kindness and confusion, but spoke only of a persistent desire to avenge Robin, Evan asked the blue-eyed girl herself if he was telling the truth. It seemed that Lady Robina understood that the Duke meant by his words her treacherous departure when her friend needed help, which is why she became agitated, continuing to stand behind Theo and agree. But Evan's face only had a satisfied smile, through which he told the upset Robina that he sincerely hoped that he had not upset her in any way, and that his behavior had not upset her too much. Hearing that even his girlfriend supported the Duke, Theo was at a loss, looking back with displeasure, because many onlookers had already gathered behind him, interested in the noise and movement around the red-haired madam. In the end, he left sadly arching his back and listening to Robina's kind words for Viola, saying that Theo was not really like that, and that she was sincerely sorry that she had to go through this because of him and his aggression. But Robina's face did not show any genuine emotion of regret or worry. Rather, it only spoke of calm because the fair-haired lady looked at everyone and thanked Evan for his attention. She even had to poorly feign grief and worry for her friend, which is why she grabbed her neckline, creating tears, and closing her eyes, saying that if it weren't for him, Lady Viola would be in great danger. The lady even wanted to touch the Duke with her hand, which is why she extended her fingers towards him, or rather reached for his brooch, which made the man become agitated and leaned back, shouting at times that she shouldn't do this. Robina and the Duke himself didn't even suspect that such a simple action from the blue-eyed girl forced the aristocrat not only to step back, but to trip over his own foot, which is why one of the guy's heels was already falling unsteadily down. The Duke himself, realizing that Viola was still standing behind him, wanted to look at her, which is why he glanced behind him, but not noticing her. He decided to just shout to her that she needed to be more careful. Viola reacted very slowly, continuing to stand behind the falling Evan, and not realizing that right now he was going to fall on her, while she herself raised her hand to her face and asked what he told her. Neither caution nor the guy's words helped her, which is why she immediately closed her eyes, falling to the floor and preparing to feel incredible pain or at least discomfort. But as soon as she opened her eyes, the Duke himself appeared before her face, lying on top of her, and looking into her eyes while she herself could not speak, continuing to stare incomprehensibly at the guy who had fallen due to failure. What surprised the protagonist even more was that he wasn't just lying on top of her, but was actually as close to her face as possible, causing a blush and shock to instantly appear on her cheeks, which was also transmitted to the man, judging by his confused look and parted lips. The girl looked closely at Evan's white eyes, which were staring only at her, asking herself one single question in her head. What just happened, and how was this even possible? Evan, in turn, watched the sweet and flushed face of the main character, whose red hair lay on the floor like exquisite fabric, and her eyes like pearls in the sea grew larger with amazement. In complete silence, the couple continued to lie on the floor, as if neither of them could speak from shock or move, causing the room to become deathly silent, created by the couple themselves. After a while, Evan decided to be the first to break the silence, continuing to look at the astonished lady and ask her if she was okay, while a drop of sweat slowly trickled down his face from prolonged excitement. Only then did the lady make an attempt to stand up, telling the Duke that she was fine, and also asking him to move away, which caused even more shock on Evan's astonished face. But he obeyed the requests of the victim. For the couple, everything seemed to cease to exist as the man slowly rose to his feet, looking at everyone with an empty, surprised face, just as the heroine did, leaning on the floor with her hands and looking at everyone in amazement. It was then that the girl noticed that when she fell to the floor, the small wound on her wrist, which she had originally, had only became larger and more noticeable, causing her hand to involuntarily tremble with cramps and pain, which was unpleasant and noticeable to others. The first to notice the heroine's wound was a calm and unsurprised Rabina, who, looking at her red-haired friend, asked if she was hurt. But the lady, slightly surprised by the attention, was in no hurry to answer her. She did it with a smile, looking at her friend politely, and telling her that everything was fine with her. Her hands just hurt a little. But Evan, who was standing behind her and feeling guilty for what he had done, listened to all of this, realizing that the lady's hand would not heal on its own and needed care, and that he had no right to leave the girl injured. The white-haired Duke parted his lips and told everyone that it could not be left so easily. The main character wore a dark, long glove, which Evan grabbed her by, because he cannot touch a woman's body due to illness. But the desire to take care of Viola is too great. The Duke, whose head was clearly full of plans, looked at the girl with a polite smile and a warm gaze, saying her name with the same respect, while the lady herself looked at him and did not understand anything. Sweat slowly trickled down her face from anxiety and the sudden events, but she still continued to stare at the aristocrat, asking what he wanted from her, also wanting to quickly end the entire performance in the gallery. To the girl's surprise, her savior did not say a word to her, but simply led her along, continuing to hold her by the glove, while the red-haired madam was amazed at every action of the Duke and his stubbornness. Even the young ladies behind were surprised by the Duke's behavior, and the sweet couple, which is why right behind Viola's back, two gossips were already discussing them as lovers who were just beginning to develop a small, bright love. Meanwhile, the couple had already disappeared from prying eyes in one of the corridors of the palace, where the Duke continued to drag Viola along with him, holding her by the glove, while the lady herself did not understand where they were going and why. Her brows furrowed slightly in anger, causing the girl's gaze to become stern and more insistent, and she used it to firmly ask the Duke where he was taking her and why he was not saying a word. But when the aristocrat didn't say a word to her, didn't even nod or make a suggestion, the girl looked at him with eyes empty from anger, not understanding how he dared to ignore her after what had happened. Therefore, she decided to quickly and lightning fast push the Duke's hand away from hers, which he did not expect if his relaxed hand did not resist the lady's sharp desire not to tolerate the guy's stubbornness and his persistence. Then he wanted to turn to her, not understanding what had just happened, while Viola looked at him with her red eyes and asked again what he would do now and why he was not answering her questions. Hearing the lady's displeasure, Duke Evan slowly turned his head towards her with a puzzled look, moving his lips in order to answer Violet with a question, as if asking what she meant. In response, the protagonist gave a fake grin, although everything around her was turning blue from her incredible rage, because she told the guy that he had exposed her as a liar in front of everyone, who all the time desperately believed that he loved Robin. Stopping the white-haired guy, calmly said that he had no intention of ruining her reputation, but Viola continued to sulk, also asking him why he so demonstratively took her out of there, because now everyone would be sure that she was taking away suitors and seducing them. In response, The blonde only looked away and fell silent, because he himself did not understand what to say to the indignant lady, while she continued asking him questions like why he did it and for what purpose. Then, in order not to subject the lady to even more stress, he decided to take a light-colored handkerchief out of his pocket, telling her that he had already told her the reason for his concern and why he was not paying attention to Rabina. Calmly bandaging the wound on the main character's wrist with a handkerchief, the guy looked only at her and repeated that her hand and condition were more important to him now than some boondink woman running after men. The surprised madam only silently looked at her wound, which the Duke himself had carefully bandaged with his handkerchief, unable to find words to express her amazement, bewilderment, or anything else, since now she was in complete ignorance. Evan's words made her pause and ask big questions, which made her look at her interlocutor in bewilderment, as if to ask why he was so worried about her wrist if it could be easily treated at home. The couple's shadow fell evenly on the floor, golden from the rays and wooden, decorated with patterns and ornaments, while the Duke answered the lady that all his worries were awakened only because of the paintings. But Viola still did not understand. Recalling that very painting of Viola, the Duke explained that she still had many beautiful paintings to paint with that hand, and that was why he cared so much about her. Then Viola, taking the opportunity, asked Evan how he liked her work. Raising his hand to his face, the Duke said indifferently that the painting reminded him very much of her because she was also very terrible, and Viola, hearing this, opened her mouth in rage and asked what he had just said. Then everything around the girl turned blue again, and Evan's words seemed to be hammered into her stunned head, saying that her picture was as absurd as she herself, who decided to love herself, but at the same time not take care of her health. Viola lowered her blue head in shame and whispered that he shouldn't say it so directly, but her friend only turned his head away, as if he didn't understand what she didn't like and what was wrong with his words. But when bright thoughts appeared in his head, from which the whole world around him acquired whiter colors, he slightly lowered his head quietly, saying that despite all this, he wanted to look at this picture just like her. The main character placed her hand on her cleavage, listening to the words of the man with a blush on his face and big eyes, and quietly surprised by each compliment of the man, who said that her work does not give him peace. As soon as the lady heard that the Duke himself was so captivated by her painting that he could not stop thinking about it, Viola's amber-like eyes sparkled with different reflections from the sincere words that were dear to her. Looking at the lady, enchanted by the compliments, with calm, steady eyes, asking if it seemed to him that she called herself a liar because of the mistake in her relationship with Robina and himself. Crossing her arms and lowering her head in shame, the lady blushed and said that everything was so, because now she did not want to take men away from Robina and be a seductress, but only because of Evan. Everyone would think that she was like that, but to the protagonist's surprise, the white-haired Duke looked at her indifferently and said that, in that case, it didn't matter, which caused Viola many questions and curiosity about why he was saying that. While the red-haired beauty looked at her interlocutor with eyes wide with shock, Evan said that he was not Robina's man, as everyone, including Viola, had thought all this time. In a slightly dark corridor, where there were tall windows with black elements, the Duke explained to the stunned girl that he himself did not know where the rumors about his engagement to Robina came from, because he still had not chosen a bride for himself. Proudly raising her head and looking at the Duke, the protagonist of the story said that even if it was true, he was still going to marry Robin, which she knew perfectly well, not from rumors, but from facts. But in response, Evan only closed his eyes and sighed, as if from fatigue, continuing to explain to his indignant interlocutor that he was only going to do this, but the engagement never happened. Once again, Viola had to stand in front of a man who was mysterious in many ways, and listen to his words, looking at him attentively with her red, gold-colored eyes, and not believing that in reality everything turned out to be much simpler than Robina told her. The guy decided to slowly adjust his snow-white locks on his head, with his hand repeating that he was not planning to marry anyone yet, and most likely was no longer looking for the controversial Robin as a wife. Looking at the madame, he had caught her eye with seductive telling eyes. The Duke lowered his hand and gave her his smile, thinking that the question of his marriage had not yet been decided. After long adventures, the story's main character wanted to lie down on her bed and look at the ceiling, trying to think about and remember everything she had heard and seen over the past eventful day. She continued to stare at the ceiling and frown, realizing that half of the rumors about the Duke were false, as was the assumption that he was a castrate, as if he did not touch women only because he had no dignity. She occasionally recalled his face, shoulders, and the brooch on his collar, realizing that he was most likely just a loving and gentle man, not accustomed to excessive attention from the opposite sex. As soon as the lady remembered the voice and face of the young gentleman, her eyes seemed to freeze from dreams, their red color became richer and more incredible, and the lady herself felt how something in her soul trembled from thinking about him. The lady's feelings only made her feel slightly embarrassed, causing her cheeks to become rosier, but thoughts of the Duke made her increasingly speculate about his personality, turning her head to the side with a thoughtful look. But her reverie did not prove to be too deep and long-lasting, because she immediately rose from her bed when she heard several knocks behind the door, which caused her to order the unknown person to enter her chambers. The maid Gina, as always modest and sweet, entered the room with a slightly frightened, worried face, as she held a basket of towels for care in her hands. When Viola, who was looking at her, asked her what was wrong and why she was so sad, the maid only lowered her head and said that Madame Marietta told her that she had hurt her wrist, which is why she sent her here. Looking to the side, the main character just remembered that she had recently seen Madame Marietta, to whom she waved her hand on her way back, thinking that she had not noticed her bandaged hand. The red-haired lady looked at the modest maid, asking her to sit closer to her so that they could both comfortably heal her wound, but the maid, frightened by something, took her words too quickly. The girl instantly appeared at the feet of the main character, placing a basket with a towel next to her, which greatly surprised Viola, who was already astonished by Gina's behavior. The garnet-haired lady looked at the maid with bewilderment and incomprehension, while Gina was on the verge of tears, immediately apologizing for being so inattentive, although Viola had not told her to kneel before her. Looking closely into the girl's eyes, the heroine realized that it seemed she was still afraid of her, because she did not know how the previous Viola treated the servants, but judging by Gina's fear, she often pestered them with scandals and anger. Then the main character immediately decided to insistently place her hands on the lady's shoulders, looking her in the eyes, and saying that she should under no circumstances kneel without a reason, especially in front of her. Extending her hands to the maid and looking at her with a smile, the red-haired madam explained to the surprised girl that she meant that she would sit next to her, so there was no need to bow to her as if she were a goddess. Pointing her finger at the maid and looking at her angrily, Viola also forbade her to apologize, since this had nothing to do with it, and it wasn't her fault that she got hurt, so there was no point in asking for forgiveness. It was clear from Jenna that she relaxed a little, which made her smile, making the world around her shine with warm tones, and also told Viola that she understood her perfectly and would not make such mistakes again. After this, the girl sat down on the bed in order to quickly heal the heroine's wound and no longer be in unequal positions where one oppresses and humiliates and the other endures and follows orders. Days passed, and the main character no longer showed up for art classes, while day turned to night, and the palace in which she lived remained unchanged, continuing to delight everyone with its grandeur. The girl decided to open the window and look out of it a little, placing her hand on the windowsill and looking at the other's palm with a smile, since it was a little swollen from the wounds, which did not allow her to draw. But as soon as the story's main character opened the window and revealed herself to the world right below her room, somewhere in the garden, there appeared a dark-skinned man with short hair who was furiously tearing at the shirt on his chest, calling for Violetta and ordering her to open the door immediately. Viola looked at another persistent man, whom the early Viola had bewitched, also watching how the brunette, saying that he was wearing her favorite shirt, said that he would pull the rope and take it off completely. The heroine had experienced many shocking moments, but the guy who threatened her with a rope was able to clearly surprise her, which is why she looked at him with wide eyes, raising her hand to her lips in shock. Looking at the beautiful scenery, the sweet lady said to herself that this would not do, so she must immediately stop this performance and prove to everyone that she was no longer a slut or a seductress. Then, taking a deep breath, She screamed at the top of her lungs to the whole palace at the guy in love with her that he was a real pervert, and he needed to get out of here and not pull any ropes for the sake of seduction. Viola grabbed her deeply flushed face, looking at the floor in excitement, and not understanding how many more men the previous Viola had, from whom she would constantly fight off. And besides, they were not the possessors of heavenly beauty. But the very next day, the main character was busy with her main task, because of which the small tube of red paint was already dirty, lying somewhere on the floor, while she herself was trying to create a second masterpiece. Tired of constantly drawing the story's main character, lay on her own works covered in different colors, turning her head to the side with a dissatisfied face, and telling herself that all this was already incredibly boring. But the lady's suffering and relaxation were interrupted by a strange female voice, which she heard nearby, and from which she turned her eyes in the direction of the sound, realizing that the one who was causing her many questions had come to her himself. The snow-white Robina looked at Viola with alarm, like a bright angel, who kindly asks her about her condition, raising her hand to her face, while her cheeks turned pink, either from embarrassment or from surprise. The elegant lady immediately stood up and showed her friend her long ponytail, explaining the mess by saying that she was simply bored from spending all her time at home, but Robina continued to feign modesty. In response, the white-haired friend with innocent intentions apologized to Viola for not visiting her because she was busy, and then the heroine politely apologized, although in reality she smiled at her friend's cunning, because in fact, Viola did not go out anywhere, so that suspicious rumors about her would not continue to spread, and Robina was probably involved in them. As if there were no suspicions about Robin, the heroine asked her what she was so busy with, and then the slightly smiling blonde said that she had recently been invited to teach at the Academy of Arts, and she was preparing for it. Standing up, the girl with the long red ponytail looked at her friend with a smile and congratulated her on her endeavors, recalling that Robina really did have amazing skills that allowed her to explain everything clearly. But suddenly, Robina became less talkative because she was thinking about something, lowering her head and devastatedly telling Viola that she was right, and she was also happy about the changes in her life. Imagine Viola's surprise when the sweet Madame approached her and immediately asked about the Duke, how his health, and how he was doing, as if she was only concerned about him, and as if she hadn't paid attention to other gentlemen before. The main character continued to stand in front of her friend, in a blue dress and black shoes, saying that if she was talking about their plan to seduce Evan, then people here would already think that she wanted to bewitch him. Bowing her head, smiling, and closing her eyes, the red-haired beauty said that she did not care too much because she wanted it at her request, as they had agreed earlier. But as soon as the main character remembered the Duke's words about them not being a couple at all, and not even planning to get married, the protagonist raised her red eyes to her friend and asked if they had really agreed on an engagement. Imagine Viola's surprise when Robina, standing innocently in front of her, said that she wasn't quite sure about that, which caused the heroine's face to show obvious shock, and she herself thought about how this was possible. The lady's gaze became even sterner, and with exactly this expression on her face, as if with cunning and anger, she looked at Robina, not understanding whether she was lying to her and why the whole plan to seduce the Duke had been started in the first place. There were blank canvases lying on the floor next to the girls, while they continued to talk a little coldly about their relationship, where the protagonist, standing in front of Robina, once again told her that, according to Evan, they were not engaged. A little confused, but definitely having some kind of plan, Robina looked at her friend with white, seemingly empty eyes, answering with the question of whether they had become so close in such a short time that he decided to tell her about it. Viola immediately said that if that was the case, then there was no need to ask her to seduce the Duke, but Robina suddenly lowered her head and looked down, admitting that she truly believed that they were engaged. The Snow-White lady's lips parted sadly when her friend with the red tail asked her in surprise if this meant that she was mistaken and that no one had actually invited her to an engagement. But Robina remained silent, and as soon as the blue-eyed short beauty said that this was true, and that she was not in fact engaged to Duke Evan, everything around Viola seemed to become darker and more aggressive, because she succumbed to shock and panic. Stunned by this news, Viola asked Robina why they weren't engaged, but she just tucked her blonde hair behind her ear, briefly saying that it was because she had helped her. At that moment, she seemed to split into three parts, continuing to spin in her head from panic, and the understanding that her plan was, on the contrary, to bring them together, not to separate them, but in the end, it was she who actually broke off their engagement. She continued to feel ashamed, so she looked at Robina and said that she was very embarrassed, but her fair-haired friend only parted her lips and heartlessly replied that the Duke had already been the one to suggest breaking off the future marriage. The girl even lowered her gaze as if from emptiness or sadness, saying that, on the contrary, it was good. But Viola clearly saw the lady's sadness, which is why she could not take her word for it. She wanted to ask her about her condition. Robina's face even darkened, which was noticed by Viola, who was looking at her and asked what was happening to her and why she was upset if she wanted to break off the engagement. But she replied that she herself did not know anything. The heroine was even more surprised by Robina's words when she decided to ask how she managed to win his heart, when she herself looked at her with red, uncomprehending eyes, being covered in paint and not understanding anything. The blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl continued to stand silently and look at her friend, hiding her feelings, while her red-haired girlfriend looked at her in bewilderment and asked whose heart she had already managed to win. But as soon as she started thinking about something, Robina lowered her head and, as if nothing had happened, replied that she did not want to hear any answer from her, and generally asked her to forget about what she had just asked her. Deciding to change the subject, Robina recalled a tall building with a square tower and high windows surrounded by a blue sky, telling her friend that the director of the academy just wanted to meet her. The next moment, Robin was already at the door, about to leave the room, and looking back as if the director wanted to offer her the same thing as her, since he really liked her painting, and in that case they would see each other there. The girl left Viola stunned by everything alone, when around her there was only empty blue serenity, as if the whole world around her had collapsed, because Robina herself had deceived her and did not know everything for sure. But the heroine's face showed even greater surprise when she realized that the director himself wanted to see her, not because of the painting, and wanted to make sure that she would be the one teaching children art, even though she didn't know how to draw at all. After some time having changed her clothes, the lady decided to go outside and take a walk, because outside the window the world was illuminated by the bright sun, and it was also safe near the palace, since a fear stood near it and guarded everything. But the girl stopped instantly, because her red eyes caught the sight of a familiar person, because of whom they instantly sparkled with new colors, as if they were playing with a new life. The fact is that Viola saw her father in front of her, who had exactly the same red hair eyes, and also a red mustache, which the girl was able to clearly see, because the man was looking at her intently and greeting her, standing right in front of his daughter. The serious father asked his daughter where she was going, and then Viola answered with a smile that she was hurrying to the academy because very important things awaited her there. The father lowered his head as the bright sun shone peacefully behind him, because he realized that his daughter was no longer engaged in seducing men, but had decided to take up painting for the first time, which made him a little happy. Time forced the lady to hurry to the academy, and soon she found herself in the director's office, where there were various shelves, books, and also a desk, the woman behind which laughed, noticing Viola's arrival. The director, wearing glasses and a light dress with a corset, began waving her arms like a professional orator, and first of all told the protagonist that she had been incredibly looking forward to their meeting because she was incredibly special. The heroine, behind whom were packed canvases and everything needed for painting, only laughed politely at the woman stretching out her hands to her and thanking her for the kind words, as if she was a little embarrassed. The director immediately asked Viola if she had accepted her offer to become an art teacher at the academy, but the heroine was in no hurry to answer, stretching out her hands to the canvases and saying that first she should look at her other works. Putting her hand on the table, the girl immediately said that her paintings were very different from the others, but the director only folded her hands with a smile and said that, for this reason, she wanted to make her a teacher. The lady's words made Viola very angry, which was evident from her dark face, and she even showed her fist to the woman, explaining that she would not be able to teach students using the generally accepted method, since she herself did not know anything related to it. But the director smiled even wider, without saying anything unnecessary, and looking at her guest with contemptuous eyes and a sly smile, saying that she had not made a mistake in inviting her here after all. After some time, Viola was already strolling through the Academy's garden, rather than inside it, where she hummed her favorite melodies and enjoyed the architecture of the square building, which had many windows and a main ceremonial entrance. The girl walked cheerfully along the road, where there was thick, well-groomed foliage, joyfully waving her arms, and thinking that the director turned out to be an understanding person, as she had previously thought. She recalled with a smile and a bowed head the moment when she stood in the room with the director, who told her all the basics of lectures and how they should be conducted in order to teach children correctly. But the girl's thoughts instantly stopped, and she herself stopped smiling because her eyes caught a familiar outline nearby, which is why she turned her eye to the same place in order to see someone better and more clearly. Turning towards the source of the noise and hiding behind a column, just in case she saw from under the shadow not only Robin, but also the one whom the heroine had seen earlier under her window, the one who threatened to pull the rope in order to expose her body. The man, as befits, had an expressive neckline on his chest, which showed off his tanned chest, on which the hand of the sweet and simple charming Rabina lay, while the guy said that he did everything as she asked. But the fair-haired beauty's expression didn't change as she spoke to the suspicious man about her plans, and only asked him why, if he had carried out her instructions, nothing had changed. The confused man replied that she, meaning Viola, had been acting very strangely lately, and then Rabina's hand let go of him, and she looked down, saying that in that case she would not reward him. The guy wanted to object to the beauty, saying that he was demanding a reward from her, but Rabina looked at him with a smirk and a blush on her face, telling him not to whine since she didn't like it, and also ordering him to find out more information. Viola, meanwhile, hid behind a column in the shadow just in time, which is why the couple never noticed her. But no matter how hard she stuck her head out, she was never able to better hear what they were talking about so quietly and suspiciously. But when the heroine looked closely at her strange friend, who was smiling at the man and making him blush, she wondered if it was really her, because now she saw a completely different person in front of her. As proof, she recalled Rabina's modesty, innocence, and sweetness in everyday life, which caused her to turn her eyes away, wondering with a puzzled expression whether she really was a simple, quiet girl. This situation only amused Viola, which made her smile and raise her hand to her face, wondering why she didn't behave like this in real life, because they could become very close if they were actually similar. Imagining Robin behind her, with a sly, barely noticeable grin and blue darkness, Viola realized that the story would really be too boring if the main character was a simple and kind person. With these thoughts, the heroine decided to go back, remembering that Rabina was upset about the situation with the Duke. But now it seems that she feels better if she constantly meets with another man. The girl very quickly reached the academy, above which there was no longer a clear sky, but rather slightly gray, large clouds that only emphasized the smooth and strict architecture of the castle. The red-haired lady wanted to walk down the long corridor with dark wooden ornaments, but she had to turn around and look back because there she heard a strange voice all too familiar. Her eyes widened as the familiar figure's features surprised her even more, and when she parted her lips, she asked the man if he was a duke and what he was doing there. Behind her, Lita actually noticed the white-haired Duke Evan, who looked at her with indifference, but was beautifully dressed like an aristocrat who now stands in front of the heroine and asks what she forgot here, and what assignments lured her to the academy. But puzzled by the man's appearance, the girl turned to him completely, and with bewilderment on her face, said that she had exactly the same question for him, because he was a duke who should be in his palace and not the academy. Waving his hand, the fair-haired, handsome man looked indifferently at the lady and explained that he was the sponsor of this institution, that is, he donated funds to the academy for various needs, thanks to which the entire building was exquisite. The guy's words embarrassed the heroine a little, which is why she scratched her head in shame and said with a smile that she was only here because of the paintings. But Evan, looking at her, immediately clarified whether she came here to teach. Hearing the strange, angry tone from her interlocutor, the lady was preparing to turn away from him, asking with anger on her face why he was so surprised. because perhaps her paintings were not as terrible as he had told her to her face earlier. This behavior made Evan smile, and he looked at Viola, saying that he didn't mean it that way. But the lady who was offended by him didn't want to look at him, thinking that this was exactly what he meant. At this point, he trembled a little and blushed with embarrassment, because he was about to laugh. But he covered his smile and told the lady that it was not that, while she herself ordered him not to laugh. In the spacious hall, where there was not a single unnecessary detail, and only tall, clean windows flaunted themselves, the couple talked about the academy, about how Evan would one day come to her lecture, and about how soon he would be disappointed according to Viola. Evan continued to laugh and tease Viola, but she only looked at him with anger and alienation, a blush on her face, realizing that he was cunning as a snake if he managed to joke with her and be mysterious. Out of anger, she wanted to flare up like fire, so that its flames would burn everything around, but she could only imagine it because her anger only promised to take revenge on Evan for unnecessary ridicule and barbed jokes. But the lady's thoughts of anger and revenge were instantly interrupted when behind her, for the umpteenth time, a cry was heard from a guy unknown to her, who with his mouth wide open was again calling her by name as if he was dissatisfied with something. And Viola had to instantly turn around at the voice with a shocked face, not understanding how many more times someone would sort things out with her, and who didn't get her attention this time. Turning around, the red-haired beauty saw in front of her the same guy who had threatened to pull her string earlier. But fortunately, he was wearing different light-colored clothes, while he looked at Viola and asked what she was doing there. The dark-skinned guy leaned towards the heroine and said that he really wanted to meet her, but she pushed him away, while Viola herself, crossing her arms, explained that she didn't really like him because of his provocative, revealing clothes and manner. After that, she turned away from the stranger to Evan, with a dark face showing disgust, saying that she did not really like men who looked at other women. The madam's words made the uninvited guest shake. He also opened his lips and asked Viola what she was talking about, as if before that they had been a strong couple, with great, wonderful feelings. And Viola didn't expect that the second stranger would also try to swing with all his might, not to hit, while she herself looked at his face in shock, because there was too little time to react. When the stranger shouted that this time she would definitely get what she deserved, and at the moment when Viola did not understand why all her heroine's men were so bold, the Duke's strong hand made the hooligan's palm bounce off with a crunch. There was a visible wound on the dark-skinned guy's palm, or rather redness from the blow, which he looked at, while Evan warned that hitting Lady Viola was strictly forbidden for everyone. But the surprised heroine was also amazed by the fact that the white-haired man hugged her, looking down at the floor and saying that she was completely clueless about men, while Viola blushed and opened her eyes in shock. While Lady Viola couldn't come to her senses from the realization that the Duke had touched her, listen, the guy stood shyly in front of them and didn't understand what kind of man was protecting the heroine and forbidding him to touch her. In the arms of the Duke, a pleasant-smelling nobleman, Viola listened with wide eyes to his voice as he said with a smile that from now on she would date him. Something changed in the girl's eyes, and she was about to boil over with seething feelings, but she could barely restrain herself, looking incomprehensibly at something and parting her lips in silent surprise and incomprehension of what was happening. Several days passed after the strange events and the Duke's confession that she was his girlfriend, but the red-haired lady continued to be skeptical about everything, thinking about what had happened with a gloomy face and not understanding what Evan was thinking when he said these words. She remembers that immediately after this, she broke away from his embrace, turned around, and furiously said that she had not planned anything like this. But Evan only asked if she had wanted to sign an agreement with him. She also remembers that immediately after the hero touched her, that same illness came over him like a curse in the family, which made him blush and sweat, and soon this fool needed bed rest. The lady in the black dress shook her head from all the information and tried to believe that the Duke should really fall in love with Robin and not with her, even though it was her fault that he was already lying in bed and could not recover. But the main character's eyes widened at the moment when she asked herself a logical question. Why does she continue to think about him, and whether Evan takes up too much space in her head? She grabbed her head in self-hatred, repeating that it was not important now, and that the primary task now was to prepare for work at the academy, because soon she would be teaching students there. But the lady's cheeks still blushed, and her eyes filled with an unprecedented life, when there were mixed feelings in her head, and her heart trembled from a completely different, inexplicable phenomenon, because of which she was embarrassed touching her face. However, as soon as she arrived at her first lecture and looked into the classroom where the students were already supposed to be sitting meekly, Vila, looking at everything, realized with shock that there was absolutely no one in the classroom. Wondering why there was no one in the classroom, she left the room and decided to go down the corridor where there were also no people, and only the sunlight diluted the loneliness falling on the floor with a glow. As soon as she got closer to the other office, her red eyes widened with slight confusion and surprise, because what she saw could have slightly shocked anyone. Looking at the stranger's office, the girl realized that there were, on the contrary, too many students around it, which made Viola even a little envious, and she intended to find out why everyone had gathered there. The backs and heads were a little preventing Viola from reaching further, so she stood behind them, slightly tilting her head and trying to see in the office the one the crowd was looking at, the one who was giving a lecture in the office. It seemed that the protagonist was not even surprised when she spotted Robin herself in the office, holding a pencil in her hands and explaining the material to the students with a smile. But her gaze seemed to notice someone. Realizing that everyone was going to Rabina because she was good at drawing, Viola turned to a nearby student with dark hair and bangs, asking why they were standing there if the class was already full. But when the student explained to the heroine that Rabina had decided to hold an open lesson for everyone so that everyone could come and watch her teach, Viola looked at her friend in the class, who was showing everyone pictures. Viola looked at her friend with round red eyes, not fully understanding what was happening, but surprised by everything, while the girl standing next to her rejoiced and said that Robina was very kind, and that this was very like her. The heroine was shocked, because she remembered the director to whom she had previously told that an open lesson was a completely new teaching method that many would like, and that should be tried. Viola put her hand to her lips and looked down as she thought about the situation, and couldn't believe that the director was actually in cahoots with Rabina, or was just helping her, but she would find out anyway. And she decided not to delay with the explanation, because even when it got dark, and it was very dark in the director's office, she showed up in it and immediately apologized for the visit, saying that she had come here for a reason. With her hands on her hips in anger, the red-haired, angry, and dissatisfied woman looked at the principal and asked why Robin was holding an open lesson right now. This time, the woman with glasses didn't smile as often, but sat at the table as expected, adjusting her accessory on her face and replying that Robina herself hadn't warned her about the open lesson, and that this couldn't happen. Viola continued to look at the woman as if she was not telling the whole story, explaining with an indifferent face that her friend was currently conducting an open lesson which she intended to conduct soon, reinforcing her words by the fact that she was supposed to start the open lesson exactly on that same day. And at that same time, Viola looked at the thoughtful director, who touched her chin and only replied that this was all strange. Looking at the main character with dirty yellow eyes, the woman explained that Robin had also come to her before, and they had talked about her lessons, and then Viola realized that perhaps there was just a mistake. But even the thought of the mistake made her angry, although on her face there was only severity and indifference, with which she quickly carried a large canvas wrapped in cloth, in order to come and explain everything. Sometimes she looked to the side, then at the floor, and then in the other direction, constantly turning her head, and thinking that now it would be best to collect all the things she brought and go home if the lesson was canceled. However, it was worth only momentarily distracting herself from bad thoughts and looking out the window, having first turned towards him when her long hair was fluttering in a light breeze, as the whole situation instantly took on an interesting continuation. The thing is, Viola not only saw Rabina in her office, but also met her eyes as if there was some misunderstanding between them that needed to be resolved. Viola was even more surprised by Rabina's reaction to her appearance, or rather by the way the blonde casually waved her hand and smiled as if she had been waiting for her appearance and intended to greet her. Then the heroine remembers that she waved back at her as if nothing had happened, but deep down she understood that this was far from the sweetest and most naive creature, but the very essence of treachery which decided to show Viola its superiority. Now she continued walking down the corridor with a face as if she was about to get Robina out from under the ground, although in fact she was only emphasizing to herself that it seemed that Robina knew everything and was playing with her. She instantly imagined other people, especially the students, who would certainly make her look like a villain in the eyes of others if Viola went to Robin right now to find out what kind of show she was putting on. Remembering her once innocent, naive face with which she spoke to others, Viola realized that she had not paid attention to her when she showed her true face, but as soon as she began the confrontation itself, the heroine instantly felt as if an unpleasant knife had been stabbed in her back. She was left completely alone when the cunning and unpredictable Robin, like a viper, decided to stand in her way. But even in the darkness in which she finds herself now, she will be able to find a way out, because there is nowhere to take her bad reputation. A malicious grin of a true villain spread across Viola's face, and a fire seemed to flare up in the circle when she realized that if her reputation was already bad, nothing was stopping her from taking revenge on Robin in all its glory. When it was already completely dark on her face, the moonlight illuminated the steps of the academy, and its architecture, the main character swore to herself that she would make the blonde regret getting involved with such a crazy woman like her. The next day, the heroine's desire for revenge dulled a little because she sat at the table with her eyes closed, because now she had to prepare for tomorrow's lesson. The red-haired girl sat at her desk and didn't even know how to start attracting students to the lecture and arousing their interest until she noticed a red book on the table that caught her interest. Taking the object in her hands and beginning to examine it in her hands, the protagonist realized that it seemed to be the diary of the former Viola, and she should read it to learn something important, also not understanding how she had not noticed it earlier. As soon as she opened it, she was not surprised that it was all covered in writing, but was more amazed that literally from the first pages it was all about Robin, which meant that there was something interesting in it. In her cozy room, where there were cute wooden bedside tables, for aristocrats mirrors on them, and some vases with plants, silence fell because the lady became more and more surprised with each page she read. She held it in her hands and looked with wide eyes at each line, realizing that if she started reading further, she would be even more amazed. There were even moments when, in shock, the lady leaned further towards the book, opening her eyes wide, and not believing what she would learn from such an inconspicuous-looking, useless thing as a personal diary. Every single line in the diary of the former Viola, who lived in the palace before the reincarnation of the real one, spoke of how everything was incredibly different from the original plot of the novel, which made the heroine horrified, opening her lips in surprise and reading all the information in the dim room. As she began to imagine Viola's family in her mind, the heroine realized that the diary was initially quite ordinary, since the former lady told her that she was learning to draw, and was often praised for it by her parents. The next moment, imagining a smiling Robin, Viola read the diary in which the former herself wrote that she considered the blonde her close friend because she helps her with painting. But the heroine imagined the smile of the truly insidious madam even more clearly and darkly when the diary began to talk about how things soon began to happen to which she could not give an answer. Imagining the old Viola sad and yearning next to some man, the heroine read the lines that said that the old girl noticed that men began to look at her often. The lady imagined how Robina would meet a suitor, reading the diary, where she said that they were very caring towards her, but she thought that it was because of her close friendship with Robina that she had now also become attractive. The heroine also remembers and recalls her own brushes with paints, which she used on canvases, and mixed with other colors on the palette, reading about how Viola believes that her style did not seem bad to her. And the main character was very surprised by what the diary said. Like Robin herself suggested, that she change her style since it was very bad. And only from these lines, the red-haired girl peered at the lines with surprise on her face, imagining in her mind how Viola every day holding a brush in her hands and standing in front of the canvas painted in the same way as Robin, the heroine realized that because of her, Viola had lost her true style in painting, losing herself and her uniqueness. When the heroine imagined two men smiling at Viola, while the mysterious Robina stood behind her, the lady wrote that she realized that they were all her friends' lovers. but she did not understand why they were hitting on her, making it look like she was stealing suitors from her. The next moment, the lady imagined herself as sweet and seemingly unremarkable. She looked at Viola with a smile and held her hands, while the diary wrote that, because of her, everyone now thinks that she is copying her style. Then Viola imagined herself looking at a mysterious man, because in the book, it was said that the old Viola accidentally met an amazing man. She remembers laughing next to him and feeling embarrassed because he was not like the others, and unlike everyone else, kept his distance from her. But next to him, she experienced incredible feelings for the first time. Remembering her garnet-colored hair, the lady reflected and wrote that this was very exciting for her, and she thought that no one would believe that she did not want to take anyone away, so she was silent. The lady stood with a heart empty of sadness and sorrow, holding in her hands a letter wishing happiness, because earlier, as she writes, she learned that this man was waiting for his beloved, but she was saddened by the fact that this girl could be Robina. Imagining her dear but slightly strange friend in a wedding dress, with a veil, Viola wrote in her diary in the past that for the first time, she wanted Robina to disappear from her life forever and never appear again. Imagining not only Robina herself, but also her groom, or rather Evan, in a white wedding suit, Viola wrote that her heart aches when she sees their happy image as if everything inside her dies. Taking a closer look at Evan's face, the main character realized that her past version wrote about Evan, the one she was in love with, and the one she wanted Robin to marry, which made her sad. As soon as the heroine read all the information from the diary, she slammed it shut in complete silence, realizing that she had no words to express the incredible shock. So she sat and breathed deeply. Putting the book back and placing her palm on it, the new Viola realized with horror that Robina was not just a fluffy bunny that everyone liked, but a treacherous creature that was ready to do anything just to hurt her. Everything around her darkened with anger at her friend, and she herself looked down ominously, saying that she would definitely take revenge on Robin and would never forgive her for ruining her reputation and making her soul suffer. Morning came very quickly, and this was only to the advantage of the main character. So as soon as the pink rays of dawn touched the academy, she was already getting ready for the upcoming day, and especially for the upcoming lesson. But when Duke Evan himself appeared at the academy in a snow-white robe, he was looking at something intently, holding his hand near his face and saying that he had never expected this. The thing is, he was standing in the main character's office all alone when the heroine stood in front of him, looking devastated, and he asked her why she was teaching the lesson alone for the second time, which was very strange. Viola crossed her arms and said with a smile that he was only making fun of her, because this time too it seemed she would not be able to teach the lesson, and all because of one very sweet-looking person who was the only one who was eager to harm her. But the lady's thoughts were instantly interrupted when a brilliant idea arose in her head, which made her open her eyes wide and look away, preparing to tell it to her friend at any moment. In a spacious office with a large bookcase, a chalkboard, and windows that were beautiful for an academy, Viola asked Evan to help her with a lesson, and he immediately agreed, saying that he had just had one of his classes canceled. Listening attentively to the teacher, the red-haired lady showed him her painting with many different colors, which is why Evan immediately asked if she had painted this picture just now, which was what she had to do in class. However, the smiling lady pointing at it with her index finger only happily said that it was an unfinished picture, which she planned to complete during the open lesson. After a while, Viola began to make her plans, which is why she was outside and walking towards the road, while an astonished crowd of people was already gathering around her, who were amazed not only at her, but also at what she was going to do. The black-haired lady turned instantly to her gossipy friend, with the fan who was looking at her with a sly look, anticipating the show, and saying that Viola was not a beggarly merchant to stick her head out into the street and square. But Viola herself did not listen to the insults of the simple nobleman, because with a serious face, she walked with a suitcase and a painting to the drawing place in order to quickly begin the lesson, which would surprise everyone. The lady had a genuine smile on her face and the determination to start creating, so she looked at the painting with motivation, holding a brush in her hands, while everyone onlookers were wondering why she wanted to paint her painting black. The same lady with the fan also watched Viola's actions, saying that no one had signed up for her lesson, which made her look pathetic, and her friend with black hair behind her agreed. Meanwhile, the painting, which had previously been in bright, varied colors, was almost completely covered in black, which people watched asking each other if Viola wanted to draw attention to herself by doing something incomprehensible. The black-haired lady raised her hand to her face, looking questioningly at the main character and asking herself why she even went outside. But suddenly, her attention was drawn to Evan, who appeared on the street. The Duke actually came out to the protagonist of the story, and not empty-handed, but with a large, thick brush, also covering it in black paint, and looking at the lady's masterpiece as if it was about to be finished. But for the lady with the fan, the Duke's appearance next to Viola only meant that she had managed to seduce him, which she muttered to her friends, suddenly waving her fan in the air as if she didn't like it. At times, Viola looked at Evan, who was paying all his attention to the painting, looking at it and drawing. But the protagonist looked into his face and realized that even at this moment he looked attractive. But the painting was already acquiring the necessary colors, thereby telling the artists that it was ready. And then the main character looked at it, decisively smiled, and told everyone that she had finished painting. All this time, the lady sat on her knees near the painting, mostly painted over with black. And sometimes she turned to the people, telling them not to stand still, but to try to paint over her masterpiece themselves. The two ladies, like everyone else present, were surprised by Viola's words, saying, "Why is this all happening?" And "Why does she need it?" As if they didn't want to take part in it at all, and therefore distanced themselves from the confident heroine. But the lady only smiled and looked at them with her eyes closed, while the lady with the fan and her friend said that she had already ruined the painting with black paint, and they did not know what else could be painted on that canvas. The lady, who at first only condemned Viola and her work, questioned every action, closed one eye, and looked at the painting with the other, telling herself that it was still worth trying. With these thoughts, she suddenly closed her fan and looked at Viola decisively, saying that she would still try to draw with her. But if she disappointed her, she would no longer try to get into her lessons. Soon the two girls, and even Evan himself, were covered in black paint, and they all looked at their masterpiece, now completely covered in blackness, while Viola continued to smile and say that if you dig with a stick in some places, it will be amazing. The girl was about to do just that, because she quickly picked up the stick, even though her fingers were covered in black paint, explaining to those present that she would just scratch the painting with such a simple instrument. And after a few seconds, the black canvas was no longer just paint, but the silhouette of a beautiful girl smiling and petting a unicorn. But the lady with the fan was only surprised by the painting technique itself. Even one dark-haired man in a white shirt, who had been watching the entire process of creating the masterpiece, looked at the heroine with a smile and said that although he didn't understand painting, he really liked it. Viola smiled at the stranger and thanked him for his words, while her audience smiled as well. And while she thought about how she knew that at first people would not understand her actions, but later they would admire her. Bowing her head, the girl admitted with a grin that she also really wants everyone to understand her work and not rush to condemn her paintings and herself just because her dubious reputation is not strong. Everyone present looked at the lady and listened to her with their mouths open, while Viola continued her monologue that even those who don't have talent can draw, because art has no rules, just as it has no boundaries. In the square at the academy, where the open lesson was taking place, where the building towered over the landscape, Viola explained to those present that, like the universe itself, their world painting has no specific meaning or rules. Viola's painting lay beautifully on the road, while onlookers crowded around it with amazed faces, understanding that art is created for self-expression, and Viola wants everyone to enjoy painting. As soon as the main character said that her open lesson was over, all the ladies, even the one who had earlier waving her fan, condemned her for every brushstroke on the canvas, looked at her, and asked how to sign up for her classes. Even the main character was surprised by the reaction of those around her to the manifestation of her creativity, which is why she looked at everyone with her mouth open and did not know what to answer, while people asked how to become her students. But she quickly came to her senses and even smiled with joy, beginning to confidently answer everyone who wanted to. while Duke Evan looked at her with a smile, as if he was pleased with her success, and with her she, giving everyone a thumbs up with incredible joy on her face. The lady replied that anyone who wanted could become her student even today, since she would be teaching her first lesson that day. While the girls continued to talk with a smile about how they needed to quickly sign up for Viola's classes, because she was a very good teacher, with interesting lessons, a lone blonde could already be seen behind them. Voila and Evan also stood nearby and talked among themselves, but turned their heads towards Robina, who continued to stand in the shadows and did not understand why there was so much noise around and why everyone admired her. Robina's expression showed excitement, fear, and confusion, preventing her from being the center of attention as usual. But she also understood that it seemed her friend was not going to tolerate bullying. But Viola herself seemed not to hold a grudge against Robina, because when she noticed her uncertain, puzzled, and secretive, she waved her hand at her as if it was her turn to make trouble for her and show off her abilities. After the grand opening lesson, the main character immediately rushed to the principal's office, as the head of the academy had called her there. And after a while, she was already standing in a beautiful and well-kept room, asking what had happened. Viola was only slightly surprised when the director took her hands and looked at her with a smile, saying that she had never seen such success in her life, because the place was already overcrowded with people wanting to learn from her. The slightly confused lady looked at the director and apologized for causing her difficulties with people, but the woman with glasses only said that there was nothing wrong with that, because she had to continue to succeed. To the main character's surprise, the woman appeared to be very admiring of her and looked at her with a smile, asking if she could increase the number of lessons so that people could see her more often and learn drawing. At first, the heroine didn't dare say that she agreed to spend more time on lessons, but then she clenched her fist and told the director with a smile that of course she could do more classes because it was important. Only after meeting with the director of the academy, the protagonist walked along the road in an uplifted mood, with the wind blowing her red hair, and she hummed songs and rejoiced at the result of the lesson. At times, she smiled as she walked and sang, realizing that now she had a lot of lessons and even more students, which is why Robina should already be doubting her strength and abilities. But as soon as the heroine approached the place where she was supposed to see her suitcase and pick it up, she realized that only the outlines of her memories of him remained, because he had disappeared without a trace. The loss of the suitcase surprised the heroine so much that she looked at its original location with such shock, as if she had not previously thought that the thing could disappear, and she would not know who took it. She remembered that this was not just a thing to wear other things, but a gift from her father, which she kept very carefully, even littering with it, because she was afraid of damaging it and wanted to keep it new. The main character wanted to be upset so that she could quickly find her missing suitcase. But as soon as she looked over the fence, looked at the road, looked into all the bushes, she realized that it was nowhere to be found. As a result, she sat down on her knees, clenching her hands into fists, and looking somewhere to the sides, realizing that it must definitely be found since her name was written on it, and therefore whoever finds it must certainly return the thing to its owner. But suddenly, the lady was distracted from searching for the suitcase and thinking about it by a strange feeling, as if there was someone behind her. And there really was an unknown person with dark trousers and shoes who seemed to have hit her. The girl closed her eyes in surprise and was about to fall to the ground because she was already losing her balance due to the unexpected stranger who also suddenly appeared behind her. But she was lucky not to feel even slight discomfort, not pain, because the same nameless man grabbed her waist with one palm, a strong, dexterous hand, and also, with a pleasant voice, laughed at the absurdity. Opening her eyes, the protagonist did not expect to see right in front of her face an incredibly handsome man with dark hair and red eyes who was smiling at her and telling her to be careful. Confused by the unexpected thoughts about the guy's beauty and his soul-stirring voice, the girl did not immediately look at him, but when she did and frowned, she immediately apologized and asked if he was having trouble. However, the lady did not want to spend a long time sorting things out with the stranger, so without even asking his name, she hurried off about her business, only waving her hand at him and promising that if she saw him again, she would give him the painting. Eventually, the main character returned to her chambers, closed the door, and began to breathe deeply. realizing that she still hadn't found her suitcase in which she kept her own brushes. But the surprises didn't end there. The thing is, in front of her stood a sweet, slightly worried Jenna, holding a letter in her hands and asking Viola if her public lesson was a success, since she looked upset. But the heroine only realized that this lady was worried. Immediately after this, Gina handed her a letter, saying that it had come in her name, and the main character, already holding it in her fingers, looked at it and asked if the message had been sent to her correctly. But as soon as she opened it and read it, she imagined her friend the Duke in a white cap and monocle, holding a pistol near her suitcase, while he himself informs her that she has it and she needs to come to him to pick it up. She immediately clutched the letter in her hand, thinking that it was he who decided to take care of her things. But now she anxiously asked Jenna, who was looking at her, if she would help her get ready for the trip. All this time, the Jeremy's parents were standing near the lady and the maid, looking at her and listening to the conversation about how she would attend the academy more often since she had not been fired, which Gina had feared. Folding her hands and smiling, the red-haired lady told the pillow that she now had many students and also many activities, to which the modest maid replied that this made her very happy and she congratulated hers. Having finished talking to the maid, the lady decided to turn to her parents, who were looking at her, because she remembered that they had tried to cheer her up many times when she was feeling bad, and now they were worried about her, showing her mom and dad two fingers, as if everything was fine with her. Now she smiled and loudly told them that now her affairs at the academy were going very well, and they no longer needed their help. When the heroine's room became a little darker, which gave the luxurious chambers even more aesthetics, comfort, and mystery, Viola calmly informed the maid that she would go to the Duke, and when she returned, they would paint. She was already wearing different clothes, but her hair still had an incredible rich beauty, even when she turned her back to Jenna, talking about drawing together and friendship. It was clear from the maid that the heroine's words had greatly encouraged her, because she jumped up from her seat and took Viola's hands, looking at Viola with wide eyes, and saying that they would certainly paint the picture together. But now she needed to be more careful. The girl tucked her garnet locks of hair behind her ear and laughed along with Gina, thinking that she was a very sweet lady and had no idea that she would want to practice with her so much. She herself did not know whether she had the ability to draw if she was ready to inspire people to draw with her determination. But now she had to meet an old rival when she went out into the dark. It seemed that Robina wasn't trying to act like a sweet, innocent lady this time, because she looked at Viola with indifference as she asked in a monotonous voice where she was going. Although they met suddenly, after long days of separation, they were in no hurry to approach each other, but stood at a distance when the main character replied that she was just going to see Duke Evan. The girl looked at her friend with a smile, saying that she had business with him, also not understanding why Robina also had a dissatisfied face, if she herself said that the Duke was not to her taste, and she never liked him. As soon as the heroine asked the girl in response what exactly she came for, she straightened her snow-white hair and answered with a grin that she simply wanted to talk to her, but realized that she had come at the wrong time. Robina hid her stern face from Viola when she turned away, but the protagonist still smiled, pointing her hand to the side and offering her to go with her if she came for some reason. It turns out that the heroine was pointing with her hands at a luxurious, shiny, dark carriage, telling Robin that the Duke had sent her a coachman and transport so that she could get to him on business without incident. And a few minutes later, Robina was already sitting in the carriage opposite Viola, clapping her hands with a grin and saying that it was good that everything worked out for her, because she was worried that nothing would work out for her. The lady's face showed surprise and gratitude, although her real version was floating next to her, laughing at every false word her friend said, while she herself listened to her lie, saying that she believed in her as a friend. Robina continued to tell her friend that she was constantly worried about her, especially when she began to change, also imagining her recent conversation on the street, where Viola was surprised by her every word. Then, while in the carriage, the protagonist of the story interrupted the lady's speech and said, asking what was so similar to her, if she had already dared to decide what she should be and what she should not be. Staring at her with an even more gloomy look, the red-haired girl asked Robin how she saw her in her eyes, also thinking in her head that she was not a doll who would do what she said. While Viola was wondering what her insidious acquaintance would answer, Robina herself simply looked away with her white eyes and said with a meaningful smile that she was only worried about her because she considered her a friend. Robina's words made the heroine raise her head up as if looking down on her, saying that she was doing just fine on her own and that she didn't remember asking her for help, unlike Robina herself, who seemed helpless. But then the blonde with light eyes and bad intentions remembered how her red-haired friend was painting on the ground, holding a brush in her hands, and looking at the canvas, saying that she was painting right on the floor, which is very unacceptable. In response, Viola only looked away, and when her face turned blue with anger, she said in a mocking voice that this would not have happened if someone had not interrupted her first public lesson. With a shrug and a smile, the charismatic lady in the white dress said that everything had turned out much better than she had expected, and that she should even thank whoever had prevented her from giving a lesson at the academy. Viola looked at the one who was touching his chin with his hand, his head down, and in shame continuing to play the role of innocence, and asking who could have treated her so cruelly, and who came up with this idea. As if crying, the lady said with a smile that she thought her abilities were good if they were trying to interfere with her. But suddenly, next to her, she remembered herself and Jenna, who had only paid attention to the hand, but not to the painting. There was silence in the carriage for a while, so both ladies in the dark salon could only hear the clatter of the horses' hooves, because Robina did not know how to answer her friend to such a conversation that almost gave her away. But Viola did not expect that Robina would not only not admit her wrongdoings, would not confess that she had committed all the atrocities, but would only smile sweetly at her friend as if they still had a good relationship, and would say that she liked her old paintings more than the new ones. But the blonde's confidence instantly faded when she looked in surprise and disappointment at the red-haired lady, who admitted that she was grateful for the advice, but was no longer going to draw in her style or imitate her. When Robina said that it was impossible since she had liked her style, before Viola lowered her head and closed her eyes, saying that she didn't really like it, but she also wanted to ask her something. The heroine asked her friend why she was so persistent, but did not hear an answer right away, because just one question made Robina lower her head and become nervous, as if she was being driven into a corner. Noticing that the blonde still wouldn't answer her main question, Viola informed her that in that case she would talk to her later, because now she had to meet with the Duke to whom Madame's carriage was already heading. Robina no longer looked confident and cunning, because just a couple of questions made her crack like a nut, which is why she looked closely at Viola, asking why she was even going to him. But the heroine only answered with a smile, saying that it seemed like Evan missed her. Adjusting her long ruby-red ponytail, Viola also said that she was very glad that Robin and Evan were not engaged, but the blonde only looked at her and hesitantly asked what she meant. Just as she was about to get out of the carriage, because the lady had taken her to her destination, she turned to Robin with a smile and said that according to her, the Duke generally hated it when women touched him, but he hugged her. Devastated and disappointed in everything, a shocked Robina looked at her friend with her mouth open as she thanked her for the opportunity to help her, because she would never have met such a wonderful person like Evan. She had already gotten out of the carriage, but continued to smile and look at the blonde about to slam the carriage doors, but once again thanked Robin and told her that it was all only thanks to her. After this, the lady quickly told her upset and amazed friend that she had to go after, which she began to look at the incredible castle of the Duke, with its rounded towers, while above them there was a rich blue sky. And even when she entered the palace, her jaw was about to drop, because she looked in amazement at the luxurious interior of the palace, even when a man appeared in front of her and warned her to keep her mouth shut. As it turned out, Duke Evan himself appeared before her, who did not hesitate to appear before her and meet her personally after the trip, bestowing Viola with his charismatic smile and white eyes, greeting the lady. They looked at each other and talked a little about how he had only invited her here so that she could be in a new place and unwind, after which Viola asked the man about her suitcase, preparing to pick it up. Imagine the surprise of the main character when Evan did not say a word to her, but only turned back with such a face as if the lady's words did not surprise him, which is why he hastened to do what the arriving guest asked him about. But after that, he turned around and showing the girl his broad back, smiled, piercing the main character with his sly look, and saying that first she should enter the palace and look around it because she had come to him. Viola was quite puzzled by the Duke's words and his strange, mysterious belief that was written on her astonished face because she did not understand why she should go inside if Evan could give her the suitcase right now, right into her hands. However, she had to go inside, which is why the red-haired Viola stayed close to the indifferent-looking Duke while they both walked towards the hall, both looking ahead, and while the heroine was looking forward to seeing her suitcase. What surprised the heroine even more was not the luxury of Evan's palace, not its beauty, which was already striking, but the servants, or rather the men in their uniforms, who looked at her with big eyes, each of them. While Viola felt obvious discomfort and anxiety, one of the Duke's servants had such wide eyes, as if the protagonist had done something wrong. Or rather, her mere appearance had impressed everyone so much that they did not hide their surprise. She decided to look at the Duke with a smirk and hint that she didn't understand what was going on. But Evan, who was looking at her, replied that the servants were so surprised by her because she was the first woman who entered his castle, because as she could see, there wasn't a single maid or servant here. While the main character was surprised by every word, the Duke said he only turned sideways to her, and with a satisfied smile replied that he remembered that he had already told her that she was the only woman he communicated with, and the last one. The girl was not only surprised by the man's confession, but also blushed like a rose, continuing to stand behind Evan and look at him with her mouth open, not understanding whether this was a declaration of love and whether her heart could withstand it. Viola didn't even think about turning away from him, but continued to look at Evan with a red face in shock, while the Duke himself smiled and asked her what was so special about it, because he also wanted to thank her for the painting with something special. Only after this did the girl look down and wonder if he was rushing things too much, and if it wasn't too wrong if she just wanted to live peacefully and not depend on anyone. After a while, the Duke and the main character sat down at the table, and the handsome white-haired man took a cup of tea in his hands, with a relaxed expression, while behind him on the wall, there was the very picture that the lady had drawn in class. Viola was surprised by the fact that the man hung her gift on the wall like a true piece of art. And by the way, he calmly sat down at the table, thinking that the heroine would also sit next to him. But the lady only looked at him and asked him to bring her suitcase. The Duke asked her to at least have a cup of tea with him, but Viola said once again that she had no time, saying that she had classes ahead and therefore needed a suitcase. But Evan only looked at her sadly, saying that he did not want to rush. But when the Duke said that this time he would let her go so easily, the red-haired beauty again looked at him with incomprehension and slight shock, not realizing what the guy was saying and why he was doing all this. Immediately after this, the guy stood up and looked at the lady with a smirk, saying that they would see each other again tomorrow. But the girl continued to be shocked, looking at him shockingly and asking what he meant. However, Evan did not caress her, simply putting the suitcase in his hands and saying that he would immediately order the servants to prepare a carriage for her, after which the lady again found herself on the street, surprised and puzzled, but with the suitcase under her feet. It seemed that Lyd was standing right under the door and was simply silent, but in fact her face expressed genuine surprise, because she herself did not understand why she was there, and for what reason the Duke offered her to drink tea. The next day, the girl quickly forgot the strange events in the Duke's house, which is why she again walked down the corridor in an elevated mood and prepared to give a lecture, waving her arms with a smile and humming melodies. The girl walked happily and remembered the maid Gina, who always said that her classes were very interesting, which made the heroine smile, sincerely realizing that this time, too, she would give an excellent lecture. But the main character's thoughts were instantly interrupted by what she noticed ahead. Or rather, her path was blocked by a small crowd of people, in the middle of which someone familiar was visible, with dark hair and simple clothes. As soon as she came closer, she recognized in that gentleman the same stranger with the red eyes and the mole under one of them, who immediately gave Madame his smile, asking if she had found the suitcase. Looking closely at his sincere smile, the main character felt a warmth in her soul, because he was also joyful, and Viola also understood that he was also listening to lectures at her academy. For a moment, The lady even forgot that her mouth had been slightly open in surprise, and the man's captivating beauty, which is why she looked at him with wide eyes, answering that she had solved that problem, to which he once again asked if she drew. Then, from the guy's strange question, the lady remembered that she had just been planning to give him a painting at their second meeting, which she told the gentleman standing in front of her, asking if he had any free time today. In response, the brunette only smiled at the girl, which made everything around seem brighter, and he also told Viola that he was completely free today, and also said that he completely forgot to introduce himself. The guy leaned slightly towards the main character, after which he said with a smile that his name was Kyle, after which Viola did the same, telling him her name and giving him a sincere, sweet smile of friendliness. Taking advantage of the moment, the main character widened her eyes, looking closely at Kyle's face, and thinking that most likely it is because he is in an affair, but she also finds this man very hot. After this, the girl immediately entered the auditorium, where she planned to give the lecture, and was very surprised when she realized that almost all the seats were occupied by spectators, who were already eagerly awaiting the beginning and an interesting lesson. Then the lady came to her seat, put her hands on it, and looked at everyone with a smile, realizing that although she knew that a lot of students had signed up for her lecture, she was happier to see them all in person. However, as soon as she turned slightly to the side and looked at the other part of the seats, she noticed out of the corner of her eye a handsome blond man she knew dressed in luxurious clothes who had just sat down, breathing unevenly. She immediately opened her eyes wider, which almost made the sparkle in her red eyes disappear. But everyone could carefully look at their beautiful and rare amber color, because with her eyes she looked only at the Duke. Viola couldn't take her eyes off him, because Evan looked a little strange, with the beads of sweat on his face, that he was losing with his hand, while he was breathing unevenly and asking everyone if he was late for class. But the lady did not answer the excited man, but only covered her mouth with her hand from slight embarrassment and surprise, because she realized that she really liked sweaty men, very hot and charismatic. Feeling that she had become a little distracted from the lecture, Willa placed her hands on the table and looked at each student, saying that, in that case, she would begin explaining the material of her second lesson. After that, she turned her back to everyone, picked up something, and began hanging it on the wall, looking at her work, and loudly telling everyone that before the start, she would tell everyone the lesson plan, the lecture for today. Turning to the audience and students, the main character showed a blank sheet of paper, a canvas on which they would create a masterpiece today, and on which Viola would demonstrate her skills in front of everyone. But her new students, especially the lady with the fan who had previously painted a picture with her in black, looked at the heroine with doubt, asking why her drawing was not on this sheet as it should be. But Viola answered everyone with a smile, asking why they couldn't see anything, since she had painted it, especially for them, also pointing to her art with her hand. But the lady only got angry, pointing her finger at her and saying that there was nothing on the canvas and why she decided to play a joke on them in this way. But it seems that the protagonist of the story guessed from the very beginning that her students would have such a reaction and similar answers, which is why she smiled slyly, as if she was about to tell everyone the whole essence of the white canvas. Everyone present was very surprised when Viola didn't just turn to the sheet of paper and start drawing on it, but decided to do it with white chalk, which was completely invisible on the white canvas, which is why everyone was silent. After that, she said that she would give everyone a white sheet of paper and chalk, asking everyone to draw something on it. But then her brown-haired student took the chalk in her hands and looked at it, only asking how to draw with it. But two men, Kyle and Evan, were pleased by the words of the lady, who began to tell everyone to draw what they care about or what they want, because no one will see it anyway, and this brought curiosity to the faces of the guys. While Viola was handing out chalk and a white sheet of paper to everyone, she told everyone to draw exactly this, since no one would see anything anyway, but they would be able to share it with someone at least with a sheet of paper. She also smiled at everyone, and with her eyes closed, said that when they expressed what they wanted and drew it, they should pass their work on to another person, so they should express themselves in their drawing. The heroine kept repeating that no one would even notice what they had drawn, which is why everyone present at her lecture began to happily draw with white chalk on a piece of paper, anticipating something interesting from Viola. However, there was only one person in the room who looked not at her own piece of paper, but at the main character who was walking around and smiling at everyone, not even suspecting that a handsome man was staring at her. But as soon as she returned to her place and noticed the attention with which the white-haired Duke was looking at her, she immediately turned away from him and began to get nervous, although she did not show that anything was wrong. She continued to lecture as usual, occasionally pointing to the board at the students, but she did so with such a displeased expression, as if she wanted to yell at Evan so that he would stop piercing her with his eyes and embarrassing her. As soon as she thought about this, the same Duke who had previously been serious towards her and looked at her just as seriously suddenly laughed as if he had read her thoughts and turned his head to the side, covering his smile with his hand. In the spacious office, where there was a pleasant dark light, minimalist lamps, and a high ceiling, everyone continued to paint their masterpieces until enough time had passed for the heroine to understand that everyone was finished. When the time came, the main character picked up a brush and began to paint it blue over her drawing, telling everyone that she had in fact prepared the painting for the lecture, but first it needed to be developed. After telling everyone that if they color the picture with their favorite color, they can see the masterpiece itself, she was able to draw a clear sky simply by running chalk across the sheet of paper and coloring everything blue. After this, the lady clapped her hands and looked at everyone with a smile, explaining that the same thing happens in life, because when difficulties arise, nothing is visible in the future, but as soon as you add bright colors, everything becomes clear. This surprised even the quietest and most taciturn lady with blue eyes, who put her hands on the table and looked at Viola with surprise, listening to her words about life and difficulties, and not just about colors and painting techniques. When the sky above the academy was once again clear, as depicted by the red-haired girl on her canvas, she told the students in one of the classrooms that her lesson was over, and that they would see each other later. After the unusual lesson, everyone was satisfied, which was evident in the students, who were happily talking to each other about the lecture and how interesting and unpredictable it was to listen to Viola. Viola was also about to go about her business, so she was packing all her belongings into the previously missing suitcase. But when someone called her name, she turned around and looked at that person. Behind her was the sweet and always smiling Kyle, who was holding his white chalk drawing folded for convenience, which he was handing to the surprised lady, telling her to accept it. The brunette looked at Viola with a smile and explained that he thought it would be a drawing lesson, but he really liked her teaching method, and for this, he gives her this drawing, wishing her sky to always be so clear. In the end, the main character took Kyle's gift in her hands, after which she looked at him with some bewilderment and devastation, but still thanked him for the surprise, also stuttering a little from the suddenness and embarrassment. As soon as Kyle said that, as soon as he had the opportunity, he would appear at her lecture a second time, the girl turned away from him and went about her business, waving her hand and agreeing that they would see each other again in the future. But the girl didn't even have time to take a few steps, because Evan immediately appeared in front of her, who persistently handed her his drawing angrily, saying that it would be better if she took it. The girl was surprised by the Duke's words, so she asked what he was saying, but the white-haired Duke continued to stand in front of her and tell her to look only at his drawing, but not the one the man gave him. Then the lady turned her head to the side and said that she couldn't help but look, but she would also look at his drawing. And then Evan asked if she was close to that mysterious aristocrat. Looking somewhere to the side, the girl said in a normal voice that it wasn't exactly like that, but that guy caught her when she almost fell, and that's when they met, and she was also holding a folded piece of paper in her hands the whole time. Hearing this, the blonde immediately became angry and asked where he was holding her and what he grabbed her by, and Viola moved away from him, saying that of course she grabbed her by the waist, thereby saving him from falling. After hearing this, the Duke looked at the heroine as if there was not just displeasure in his eyes, but something more akin to anger and rage, which is why the lady looked at him and did not understand what was wrong with her words. They stood in a corridor where there was absolutely no one, which caused an awkward silence between the couple, in which the lady continued to discuss whether Kyle should have grabbed her by the throat or something else, so as not to touch her body. After some time, the main character was already sitting at the table in her office and holding a brush in her hands, looking at something, thinking whether she should first look at Evan's drawing, since he was behaving very strangely and persistently. And as soon as she opened the drawing, she noticed that Evan had also drawn a blue sky with chalk strokes as clouds. But she also noticed the figure of a girl drawn on the paper. The girl continued to look at Evan's drawing with interest in a completely empty room and complete silence, realizing that he himself had previously mocked her abilities, although he drew no better than hers. The heroine continued to look at Evan's gift with a smile, realizing that she would definitely frame it for a long-lasting memory, so that she could admire it and look at it often, remembering that lesson and the Duke. But suddenly, she looked ahead, and while Evan's drawing was still in her hands, she remembered that Kyle had also given her his masterpiece, which meant she needed to see it immediately. As soon as the heroine opened Kyle's drawing, she parted her lips in surprise and looked at it with bated breath, realizing that this was far from what she expected to see. All this time, the lady looked attentively at Kyle's masterpiece, in which he depicted not just her, but every outline of her hair, smile, hands, body position, and even the rich crimson color of her curls. She was all alone among the white walls with royal ornaments, but she did not feel lonely because Kyle's amazing portrait fascinated her, and she whispered how beautifully he depicted her. But suddenly, Jaina entered her chambers, who was no longer afraid of her at all, but on the contrary, always came to her with a smile, which she did this time, greeting her before informing her of something important. Having brought the object on a tray, the girl showed it to Viola and said that she had received a letter from Lady Robina, which she needed to read, because as she knew there was probably something special in it for her. Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, Viola's mom and dad were peacefully strolling around the palace together until they saw their daughter nearby, which caused Viola's mother to turn her head warily towards her, and her father to just look at her angrily. The parents looked intently at the main character, and she decided to do the same, looking at them with her beautiful eyes, while her father and mother noticed her luxuriously styled hair as if she was going somewhere. They stared at her for a long time, because Viola's dress attracted a lot of attention, especially because it had a deep neckline, while she herself stood like a true lady, which made everyone talk about her attractiveness, which was what her mother did first. An alarmed elderly woman with wrinkles, blue eyes, and red hair looked at her daughter, asking where she wanted to go, looking like that. But Viola only smiled, saying that she was going to a place where she would soon win. Mom looked at the main character with delight, and she did not ask any more questions. But the father, looking closely at his daughter's determination, said that in that case, he should give her something. A man with red hair and a beard quickly pulled out a box with some kind of decoration from somewhere, while Mom was saying that it was a very rare and beautiful relic, but the heroine's father had already said that she deserved it. The man quickly placed a necklace with minimalistic but small diamonds around the girl's neck, which surprised the lady greatly, while her dad said that he didn't know where she was going, but she definitely shouldn't lose. It seems that the heroine wanted to object to her father, but did not do so, and only closed her eyes, realizing that these were her mother's jewelry, which were very precious, but he gave them to her. She decided not to upset her parents, and also not to delay, so she quickly headed to the right place. But again, on her way, she met Duke Evan, who looked at her with a smile, saying that the decorations suited her very well. But as soon as the man appeared in her field of vision, she immediately became agitated and began asking Evan why he was also going to Robina's birthday party, to which she had also been invited via letter. Crossing her arms and looking at the man with indignation, the heroine said that after the breakup of an engagement, people usually do not go to each other's birthday parties. But Yvain interrupted her, saying that he was not going there because of her. When the girl asked him why he had come here and was getting ready for the celebration, the man only looked at her with laughing eyes, as if he wanted her to figure it out herself. Already about to take off his snow-white, perfectly matching and luxurious jacket, the Duke replied that he was going there only for her sake and not for Robina's birthday, and especially not for her own. It turns out that the man took off his jacket only to cover Viola's body, which was slightly exposed by her revealing dress, which he did while the lady looked at his hands in surprise and remained silent from shock. The girl already had her jacket on her shoulders, while the Duke was telling her that it was not necessary to bare her shoulders in order to look attractive because she was already beautiful, but at that time, surprised people were already gathering behind her. But when Viola heard a cunning and equally insidious female voice behind her, she turned around angrily, already anticipating seeing the hero of the occasion, her main enemy behind her. Behind the main character in front of everyone, there was the kind and innocent sweet as a lamb, big-eyed Robin, looking at her friend with a smile and welcoming her to her party. She continued to show everyone her smile, hiding from everyone, her real, probably negative emotions looking at the floor and saying that she was also glad to see the Duke who visited her modest celebration. Everyone around was more surprised by Viola, her charisma and incredible dress, which is why they looked at her with their mouths slightly open, while she herself told Robin that the most important thing was that she liked everything about her party. They all stared intently at the Duke's jacket, which lay on the fragile feminine shoulders of the main character, which gave rise to gossip that as they thought, she turned out to be a cunning seductress. Robina, wearing a beautiful and elegant blue dress, approached the Duke and Viola next to him, saying that she was serenely happy for her holiday, but she did not understand one very interesting, ambiguous detail. Viola was indeed wearing Evan's jacket, which only added to her already beautiful look, with her red hair and her father's necklace. But Robina suspiciously asked her only about the jacket, asking what she was wearing. And the blonde, who had not expected any drastic actions from Viola, was incredibly surprised, and froze when her friend whispered in her ear that as she had already understood these were the Duke's clothes, and that in fact he did not want other men to see her shoulders, and since he was very shy, she would only say this in her ear. Viola knew perfectly well that Robina was not an ordinary lady, and that she could control her emotions in difficult situations. But as soon as she said this, she shamefully lowered her head, and her eyes widened in shock. Meanwhile, Viola was already preparing to give Robina her birthday present, handing over a certain drawing to Robina, and saying that she wasn't quite sure whether she would like it or not, but she would give it to her anyway. Robina smiled, taking the gift and thanking her. But at that moment, everyone started whispering that Viola was very arrogant if she only gave everyone paintings that were already painted in Robina's style. In response, Viola simply folded her arms, closed her eyes, and began to wait for the moment when Robina Innocent, in front of everyone, would look at her work, which was in no way similar to her strength, because it had unique outlines and technique. The story's protagonist painted a flower for her friend, a gardenia, using a stunning and captivating mosaic technique, with the entire painting taking on a blue hue as if symbolizing its owner. Having just caught a glimpse of Viola's painting, everyone around immediately began to whisper in surprise, looking at the work and saying that they had never seen anything like it before, recalling that Viola was after all a brilliant teacher. While everyone around was just becoming convinced that the main character's paintings could not be repeated, Viola herself closed her eyes and said with a smile that the colors in the painting were very similar to her, and she was happy to give this masterpiece to her. It was clear from Lady Robin that she didn't even know how to get out of the awkward situation Viola had put her in, because now she was looking at a really good piece of work, with empty eyes, not knowing what to say. Then Robina imagined the wilting petals in her head, remembering that the flower itself, which Viola had depicted, had a beautiful aroma and appearance, but it quickly faded and left an unpleasant impression. While the heroine herself was thinking that she had depicted what was needed in the painting, Robina carefully held her friend's gift in her palm, asking if she would return to her previous style of painting as she was worried about her. The red-haired lady was slightly surprised by Robina's character and behavior because the blonde put her hands on her shoulders, desperately, asking why she suddenly changed her style and why she only draws like this lately. But at that moment, a ray of truth and justice seemed to fall on Viola when she looked away in front of everyone and said to Robin, as if she had already told her, that she was not going to go back and paint the way she used to. Robina seemed embarrassed by her friend's words, which made her shyly shrink back, admitting that her work had become very distant for her, and she would like to see her previous works. Other people also continued to stand and gasp at every word the ladies said, realizing that Robina was strange, even when Viola looked at her and asked why she wanted to return to what she had before. Throwing up her hand, the lady in red continued her question, asking why she wanted to return everything even after those dry spells, saying she copied her style. But Robina, as if not understanding anything, asked what she meant. Then the main character smiled so widely and slyly, as if she felt that now she was not playing by Robin's rules, but she was deciding her own fate, forcing her friend who was mocking her to accept everything and agrees. When Robina continued to look at her and not understand Viola's assertiveness, her intentions and why she wanted to leave her alone, so much the red-haired heroine loudly told her, right in the eyes, that she no longer wanted to be her shadow. She even turned to the other ladies and gentlemen, looking at her smiling, and saying that she would continue to teach new drawing styles, and new students, also inviting everyone to her lectures. Robin seemed to have nothing to say, which is why she only looked at Viola, not understanding what was wrong with her, and why she began to surpass her, sadly saying her name, as if preparing to hear the answers to all the questions. But the main character only turned to her, getting ready to leave, also looking at her with a satisfied smile, wishing to see them both at the academy where she would teach many students. Immediately after she had survived the meeting with Robina and put her in her place, the lady stretched and smiled sincerely, realizing that now everything was not so bad, and telling the Duke that she felt very relieved at heart. When Viola noticed that Evan, who was next to her, had suddenly gone silent, she looked at him to understand what had happened, but only noticed an embarrassed man who was blushing looking at hers. He also abruptly turned his gaze away from the girl, looking at the floor, with an even greater blush, also speaking through a sly smile, and asking if this was the power of influence that everyone had heard so much about regarding Viola. The girl then wondered if he was going to use his smile as a weapon to make her feel embarrassed again, just like the first time she came to his house, while all the servants looked at them in surprise. The next day, Viola decided to go to a shop with art supplies, which was nearby, and was located among other houses, snow white and wooden, where commoners lived. The store turned out to have a sufficient number of different brushes and canvases, with boxes which the protagonist looked at, saying that it was amazing, and that here she could find everything she might have previously needed for painting. But the girl didn't intend to linger in the shop for long, because in a few minutes she was already carrying a bag with the necessary supplies in her hands, walking along the road and smiling, because for her it was a good day again. While the girl was thinking about whether it was worth going into other stores, since she was in the city for the first time in a long time, someone touched her from behind with an index finger, which Viola immediately felt. She quickly turned back, without any visible emotion of joy or confusion. But while the sunlight fell on her face and hair, only beautifying her, the mysterious stranger greeted her. Turning around, the girl noticed a familiar face behind her, in the form of Kyle, who was leaning towards her and smiling as if greeting the young lady with one smile and showing friendliness with his sweet eyes. The girl was holding her box of art supplies in her hands, but a man immediately took it away to help her, while the lady asked what he was doing there. And while he answered that he sometimes painted, and that's why he also bought brushes. The lady answered the aristocrat that she had also come to buy the necessary things, and the guy replied with a smile that in that case they could go together in his carriage, also pointing at her with his hand and repeating that he was not a student. The girl decided not to refuse the aristocrat's help, already sitting in his carriage, and asking why he was going to her lessons, if she understood perfectly well that he was already drawing well, even better than her. But as he was about to answer, the sweet lady, the brunette with a mole under his eye, only looked away, admitting that he didn't need drawing or skills, because he only went to lessons for her sake. While the guy next to her blushed and looked at her with a smile, the red-haired beauty herself clearly did not expect such an answer, which is why she looked at him with bewilderment, asking if this was true and receiving the answer that it was true. But that wasn't all, because after the awkward confession, Kyle bowed his head lower, blushing even more, and saying that he goes to her classes because he fell in love with her image as a teacher from the first time. Then the heroine looked at him with wide eyes, not believing what she was hearing, and constantly remembering whether the previous Viola had a romantic line, or whether she should not take this so seriously. The mysterious, handsome man remained mystical for Viola because he continued to smile, confessing one thing after another, making the main character doubt that he was an ordinary guy. But when their carriage arrived at their destination, or rather at the academy above which there was already a blue sky, lightly strewn with clouds like cotton wool, The lady mentally thanked the author of the novel for creating such characters. The carriage stopped, and the man offered his arm to the lady so that they could descend to the ground more safely, while the aristocrat warned her that if they had arrived, they needed to hurry to class immediately and not be late. The carriage stayed next to the couple while she talked about various topics, and while the main character was preparing to thank Kyle for his help, before doing so, looking into his eyes and feeling the warmth of his hand with her palm. As soon as Viola said what she wanted, she couldn't finish just a few letters, because behind her, she noticed a dark silhouette, large and noticeable, which was moving towards her, and the unsuspecting Kyle. It was clear from Duke Evan's face that he was not very happy that the unknown man was next to Viola, but was angry with him, which is why he was preparing to approach the couple and the worried heroine who noticed him. As soon as he said Kyle's name, the guy turned around and looked at the guy who had arrived as if he was not at all happy about his arrival, but was forced to look at him and greet him out of decency. But unexpectedly for everyone, the white-haired guy only extended his hand to the seemingly familiar man, with a smile saying that he was glad to meet and make a new acquaintance. Like true friends, they shook hands, hiding their emotions of ill will and hostility in their expressions. Because if anyone else was near Viola, Evan would no longer leave her alone. Kyle also smiled at Evan and shook his hand, saying that he was also overly happy to suddenly meet him, which made Viola, who was looking at them, understand that they didn't know each other well, but they got along well with each other. But she still looked at them with surprise and wide eyes, keeping her lips slightly parted, and realizing that their relationship was very different because they had already seen each other in her last class. Kyle was the first to talk about Viola, looking at his friend with a smile and warning that he would help the main character carry the things and take her to the office so he shouldn't worry. But the previously smiling and friendly, white-haired Duke suddenly became more serious and stern in his voice, telling Kyle to his face that he would carry her things and walk her to the office, and that he could go from here. Between their gazes, there seemed to be a lightning bolt of anger and argument, while the main character stood nearby with a box in her hands and did not understand anything. And while Kyle continued to tell his opponent that there was no need to worry about it, unable to bear the argument between the two men, the red-haired lady seemed to flare up with anger and fury, continuing to hold the box in her hands and shouting at Kalis Evan that she would carry everything herself and lead them to the office because it was time already. Only then did they fall silent, continuing to look at each other with devastation. But they had no choice but to agree and follow the angry lady who did not need any unnecessary showdowns. When the main character found herself in the classroom, the lesson began immediately and was devoted to a technique called marble, which is special because oil paint is suppressed in water and paper is placed on top, thereby beautifully smearing the paint over it, which in her mind looked very beautiful, like gold shimmering in different shades. This is exactly what one brown-haired student with straight hair was looking at, examining the patterns on the paper with amazement on her face, while behind her, a girl with bangs also looked at the creation in fascination. The other girls, both male and female, also looked at the boxes, where the multicolored water floated beautifully, giving its color to the paper, and thus creating a unique pattern that surprised everyone. The main character also held a sheet of paper with the resulting patterns in her hands, but she looked at one of her students, asking herself what Duke Evan had created and whether he had created something beautiful. But as soon as she noticed something unusual, her eyes instantly widened as much as possible, because the result Evan got amazed her beyond belief. The Duke himself sat at his place, crossing his arms with obvious displeasure, as if he alone had failed in something, which is why he sat there with frowning brows and indignant eyes. The thing is, the pattern on the Duke's paper didn't quite work out, so there were only incomprehensible green lines on the sheet, which made the main character wonder if he was even more talentless than she was. Approaching him closer with genuine surprise, the girl looked at Evan, who was not going to change his dissatisfied pose, saying that what was on the piece of paper perfectly described his emotions now. As soon as the heroine asked if he was angry, Evan's face became even more displeased and greener, as did the resulting drawing, which is why he did not want to answer the heroine because everything was already clear. He just turned to her and angrily told her to be careful, but the red-haired lady, perplexed by everything that was happening, only looked at him questioningly, asking what he meant. While in a spacious lecture hall, where everything seemed to be green with the Duke's anger, Evan explained to the heroine that all the men who wanted to get to know her looked and behaved very strangely. The girl smiled at the Duke, although in reality she was imagining over her head how she would teach Evan a lesson, shy and embarrassed by the words that, according to his logic, she should be wary of him too, because he was also a strange guy. With the thought that she was the only one who was dangerous in this room, Viola glanced at the 2 jars of paint lying next to the Duke's box of water, inviting him to paint a new picture, which she would give him. After this, the lady with red curls took the wonderful, delicate drawing object in her hands, looking at the paper and trying to depict on the paper the most attractive drawing so that the Duke would definitely like it. The heroine had already finished creating magic in the form of a drawing on a sheet of paper, and the Duke watched her creation closely until he blushed, looking at the result of the lady's efforts while she asked his opinion about her drawing. Evan was very surprised that the girl herself decided to show him her drawing in which she depicted a heart in red, smiling and saying that this is what her heart looks like because she is also all red, like a pomegranate. But the Duke was not so surprised by the drawing itself as by the sincere emotions of the main character, because she looked at him without any embarrassment and smiled, which made the man's heart flutter and his soul laugh. The guy immediately took the drawing in his hands and began to examine it as closely as he could, which greatly surprised the lady watching, who clearly did not understand what it was for and whether everything was okay. She never expected that the Duke would like her creation so much that his ears would quickly turn red, which was difficult to notice due to the guy's contrasting white hair and light, usually dull skin. Evan himself felt that he was gradually turning red, which is why he covered his face with his hand, while his face instantly turned red, and for some reason told Madame that he would think about her proposal in a positive way. Viola did not understand the Duke's words at all, so she looked at him with questions, while a drop of sweat ran down her face, and in her head she tried to understand what the gentleman meant if she only drew a picture for him. The boy remained sitting there with Viola's drawing, while the main character standing next to him, gradually realizing that Evan most likely took her heart as a declaration of love, told him to be sure to look at the other students' work because he would understand everything and be surprised. He would not have paid attention to the heroine's words if Viola had not clarified that it was necessary, which is why he raised his head in confusion and began to think about what his lady meant and why she said such a strange phrase. After this, the protagonist of the story walked to her seat, placed her hands on the table, and loudly declared that her lecture was over and all students could leave. The heroine also asked everyone to leave their drawing on the table because they would still need it for future creations, and they also needed to dry. And the students listening to Viola actually put their works on the table. The girl thought for a long time about how all her students were learning quickly, and that this time they were trying very hard, but suddenly her attention was drawn to the one who was sitting in his place, which made her a little surprised, because everyone had already left. Viola was so attracted to Sir Kyle, who was still sitting in his place as a student, and smiling, placing his hand on his work, which pleased her with its beauty and clarity, because he accurately depicted the lake and the landscape. The girl seemed to be a little angry with him, because he was able to draw such a complex picture with such simple materials. But Kylie himself continued to smile and say that her drawing technique was very unusual. His smile was warm and even charming, which is why many ladies certainly admired him and his beauty. But now he looked at the dissatisfied main character and asked her to teach him how to draw using her method. But Viola looked at his painting in which he depicted mountains, a lake, and a river with rocks, forest, and grass, telling him in her head to look at his creation right now and not to talk nonsense because it was he who should teach her. The lady continued to look at the boy's painting and admire it in her heart of hearts, while Kyle himself was already holding out a tube of red oil paint in his hand, asking if this was the best color to use. He continued to smile sweetly and look at his teacher, while Viola herself did not understand why she should teach a professional, but she still picked up his paint in order to show her painting method. After a while, the lady mixed some red paint on the water and drew a large stroke across the middle of the heel, still not understanding why she should read such a genius in drawing as Kyle, why he needed this at all. All this time, the brunette carefully watched the actions of his acquaintance until the sweet smile slid off his face, and when Viola pressed the sheet of paper to the water so that the paint was absorbed into it, leaving behind a drawing as well. As soon as the main character handed the resulting red heart into Kyle's hands, the white-haired Duke sitting behind them at a distance immediately noticed not only that she was next to him, but also what she had drawn for him. But only when he turned his head, he looked at the other drawings of the students with a shocked expression on his face, as if he had never expected to see such a thing, which made him anxious finding answers to all his questions. The thing is that absolutely every drawing depicted a red heart, and it is logical to think that Viola was not confessing her love to him, but demonstrating a drawing method as she had done to all the other students before. But this surprised Evan so much that his eyes instantly became wider and more piercing, as if the whole world had collapsed in his head, although in fact, he had been slightly mistaken in understanding Viola's actions. And while the Duke couldn't believe his eyes, the main character remembered his first reaction to the drawn heart, and realized that she was glad that he understood everything, but still, for some reason, she felt very sad. Because of the sad thoughts, she bowed her head down and became more empty, as if there were no more thoughts about love and feelings in her head. But on the contrary, she thought only about the bad. She imagined herself with the Duke in her head, holding hands and like silhouettes being in her dreams, while the protagonist herself emphasized to herself that she was not the one who would heal him, and she did not need to chase after anything. When classes ended and the main character hurried home, she decided to go down the stairs. But on her way, she also met Kyle, who said that he was waiting for her again, which was already suspicious for her. It seems the man wanted to go home with the lady, but when he turned to her, he noticed Viola's sadness, which is why she looked at the floor and did not even look at him, actually thinking about the Duke, because she was sad that she would no longer mock him since he had already disappeared without a trace. Noticing the girl's distress, Kyle, being with her among a tall building with various ornaments, decided to compliment her, saying that every activity she did surprised him very much. But this did not cheer Viola up. Turning completely to the lady, who was clearly not indifferent to him, Kyle once again gave her a sweet look and smile, asking her about the class schedule, apparently, to quickly find out when she taught. The girl sadly explained her sadness and thoughtfulness by saying that she didn't know how to draw a picture, simply, but when Kyle replied that it was a very difficult task, the silhouette of Viola's white-haired jealous man was already visible behind him. The red-haired lady smiled at the man only when she started talking about drawing, confessing to the brunette that she really wanted everyone, without exception, to draw to bring joy to everyone and to enjoy it themselves. But as soon as she heard a man behind her ask why she liked it, Viola instantly turned her head towards the voice, because she never expected to hear a third person in her conversation with Kyle. The girl was a little clumsy when she noticed Duke Evan and immediately asked him if he had gone home, because she herself did not notice how she was not standing straight on the steps, which is why her leg was already falling down. The red-haired beauty was so taken aback that she didn't even understand what was happening, because she didn't expect to pull such a trick on herself, and that's why her face instantly showed genuine shock from the suddenness and confusion. She only had to close her eyes and silently pray to the Duke that at least he would grab her and save her from falling, because she no longer felt the surface under her feet, but was falling with the desire to see only Evan in front of her. A second later, somewhere near the academy and its tower, a loud thud was heard, as if Viola was about to fall, or someone quick and agile managed to save her, someone who did not spare his health for her. The girl was already preparing to experience incredible pain from a possible fracture or bruise, but began to suspect something was wrong when she felt a man's hand on her waist, when she herself did not suffer from any discomfort. She quickly opened her eyes to quickly find out what was going on, and when she understood, she opened her pupils wider in surprise, looking at someone, and with her mouth open, shouting out the Duke's name. As it turned out, the girl didn't feel any pain, because the blonde man took the entire blow and helped her fall on himself, thereby protecting her from all injuries, although he himself no longer showed signs of life. Viola realized that he was unconscious the moment she noticed his angry face, which no longer said anything, because he did not open his eyes, did not say anything, and certainly did not get up. Viola was on the verge of tears of guilt as Kyle spoke from behind her, saying that he would immediately call for help, also asking the lady if she was hurt, to which the girl replied that she was fine. She didn't care about Kyle because the only thing she cared about was the Duke who decided to sacrifice himself for her, which made the lady cry, calling his name in the hope that he would refuse. Tears were flowing like a river, but she continued to sit on her knees in front of the motionless man, wiping her face with her hand and calling Evan's name for the umpteenth time, ordering him to wake up. Drop by drop, the girl's tears broke sadly and devastatedly on the stones of the road. But the girl kept calling for the Duke, as if he would hear her voice in unconsciousness and immediately wake up and move. She looked at him with teary eyes, not understanding why he lost consciousness after such a blow. And that is why she asked why he no longer reacted to her, because she was in great pain. Out of sadness and grief, the girl was already remembering moments with him, saying that she would no longer mock him, call him a castrate, and think that he had some kind of defects, but she just wanted him to wake up. But nothing helped the Duke to wake up, so he lay on the ground unconscious, while the long-haired beauty looked at him with tears and promised everything if only he would hear her voice and come to his senses. It seems that the main character did not even notice that her loved one pursed his lips, as if he was about to wake up, but she did not notice this, continuing to sob. However, the lady's sadness was suddenly interrupted by sharp noises and indignation. Why had no one come yet if Kyle went for help, and that no one was coming to her right now, which is why she looked away. Just when she was ready to go for help on her own, so as not to wait for Kyle and the others any longer, the heroine wanted to run, but she was stopped by a man's hand that grabbed her wrist. The girl instantly turned back and looked down because she realized that it could be Evan who had woken up from his injuries, but there were still tears and sadness on her face from what had happened, with which she looked at the man. The first thing the young madam saw was the Duke's body, which was slowly rising to its feet, and his hands were clenched into fists because he was about to tell the girl something important with a smile. The guy, as if he had never fallen down the steps, rose to his feet and hugged the astonished heroine, tightly smiling and asking her if she would regret what she had said to him earlier in tears. The Duke's words left behind many questions, which made Viola only silently open her eyes wider, not understanding whether he had heard her desperate, sincere words, and whether he had been pretending all this time. After this, he released the girl from his embrace, while the red-haired madam looked at him with slight indignation, and was in no hurry to speak, listening to Evan's smiling words, saying that he had finished his check. The Duke's words made the main character's face turn blue, looking at him with genuine shock. But this only made Evan happy and made him smile, extending his hand to her and saying that she was too much trouble. But suddenly, he became much more serious, looking at the lady with what seemed to be not only a stern, but also an offended look, saying that he would remind her once again that he was not a castrato and that she should not call him that anymore. The girl shook with anger because she realized that the guy had been deceiving her all this time for his own benefit, but she did not dare to hit him, only showing her fist and thinking that he was not only a talentless person, but also a scoundrel. Imagining his hair, his broad back, and the dark clothes that perfectly accentuated his toned body, the red-haired protagonist promised herself that she would take proper revenge on him for this too, and truly castrate him. As soon as the guy asked the girl if she noticed anything strange, she instantly went berserk, angrily yelling at Evan, asking if he wanted her to make him lose consciousness for real, but that's not what he meant. But the guy suddenly grabbed the furious lady's fragile shoulder with his big hand, saying that it wasn't that at all, because only now he felt something special. Putting his hands on her shoulders, the guy looked the worried, previously crying lady in the eyes, saying only that he was hugging her. But the surprised Viola continued to look at him, not understanding what he meant. There were only centimeters between the couple, and they both began to blush more and more, while the red-haired beauty began to understand that the one who had a severe illness due to touching women was now touching her. Then she raised her red eyes to him, as if in anticipation of seeing new emotions on the Duke's face and understanding what he was feeling as he remembered his illness, the symptom of which magically disappeared due to the embrace. But the Duke continued to look at her with a smile and a slight blush, as if he wanted her to understand everything herself. but only the realization that there were no longer any barriers between them made the heroine worry even more. They continued to stand next to each other and look into each other's eyes when there was no one around and no one bothered them, when mixed feelings previously incomprehensible to either of them were born between them. The serious Viola seemed to be speechless with shock, whispering to the Duke that this could not be, but he only hugged her a second time, saying that she must take responsibility, but the lady asked him for what exactly. The guy was in no hurry to answer the girl, because he sincerely enjoyed her hugs and warmth, the aroma of her pomegranate leaves, and the vibrations in his body from her voice, saying that now he couldn't live without her. There was a cloudy sky above the academy, which made the garden and road of the institution not have such bright colors. But this did not mean that there were the same gray cloudy feelings between one couple. After all, there was no longer any hostility or unfriendliness between Viola and the Duke, because after an awkward but very important moment for their hearts, they sat together on the bed next to each other and talked about different things. But this time, they were not destined to be alone in a quiet room, because the door was opened by the one who has a fragile pale hand, as well as a sweet and unremarkable, but very cunning voice. That person turned out to be Rabina, who entered Viola's chambers with dull eyes, asking the heroine if she had fallen and if she was in pain, as if she was genuinely worried about her.